Little Boys.
I'm Mark.
Bog Beef. You're joined today with Lord Yarvin, Gray Mirror, Gray with an A,
Gray with an A.
.substack.com.
Gray with an A, the American Way, .substack.com.
This is incredibly intimidating. This is this is one of these things you can't. It's difficult to introduce because smart guys they get nervous when you start kissing their ass too much.
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
I thought about a way to explain because lots of people. Well, I'll just put it this way. So this is a guy who thinks in big scale, thinks in systems. Best way I can describe this. So there was one day. This doesn't happen to everybody. So there was a day that Curtis Yarvin is at work and he goes, "Well, goddamn, I guess I'll just have to write my own programming language." That doesn't happen to everybody.
It's more common than you think, actually, but it's still it's true. It doesn't happen to everybody.
Yeah, and so we've got a hot topic. This is something that everybody wants to talk about, and really, this isn't really a subject for amateurs. This is kind of you got to know what you're doing with something like this. And so, what this story starts in September 2020, I believe. Mr. Donald Trump, on his way out, issues this what do you call it? This kind of
executive
paper,
order. Manifesto. I believe it's an executive order, but kind of legally it might as well be a tweet. But go on.
Yes, and he says there's this thing called CRT, and we're going to cut off no more these training seminars and this kind of stuff from the federal budgets, which he controlled at that point, and which was rescinded like as Biden is walking the door. He says no more money to this. And there were comments in this thing where he says this is an evil idea, which is an important part. And by the way, this discussion is based off a piece on graymirror.substack.com. Your piece, a snippet of a larger piece, and the snippet, I would guess we would call it on banning ideas.
That's right, and that's the public one. And then I've kind of adopted the kind of marketing model of Scientology in this latest thing, where you sort of get a really meaty good story if you read on banning ideas, and then if you go further and you want to purchase the premium content, you get to As Breathing and Consciousness Return, and that shit'll just blow your mind. But you got to pay for it, and it's like the Xenu of Gray Mirror. There's the more I grift, the more I admire. Just it's the amazing grift that was Scientology. But yeah, on banning ideas is the piece, and it's basically about our little crusade against critical race theory. So do you want to where do you want to start with that? Can you get me from there to a question?
Okay, so I guess well, I don't know. So there's let me think how to go with this. So and by the way, the premium content, if you keep going, it goes right into basically how to become a dictator of the United States, which is you would figure information like that might cost you a few nickels.
Exactly.
My favorite part was when he debunks Plato in the full article.
Yeah, as one does.
As one does.
Let's just go straight to high IQ stuff here, right? Because we want to blow past. Because
sure.
the easy part to me is that, look, you're like if you look at the teaching profession, the institutes that create the teaching profession, this is just this idea is not going anywhere.
Well, it's like trying to strain the shit out of sewage, basically. I mean, if you'll excuse my French. I mean, it's just like it's trying to strain the shit out of. It's let's go over the easy part first. Can I kind of
sure
recapitulate the easy argument first, because the easy argument really needs to be made. The easy argument is. There's something about conservatism which has this kind of, I forget who called it. This isn't my term, memento conservatism, where they basically have no idea of the same things that have used the same approaches against the same enemies in the past, or even more so, they despise them. So it's when I think about, for example, when I think about the sort of the populist electoral political crusade against teaching, quote, critical race theory, what I think of is, for example, let's go back 40 years and look at Anita Bryant's campaign against homosexuals in the schools, or teaching homosexuality in the school or whatever. Here was this like model who was like the spokeswoman for Florida orange juice. And then, you know, she started to lead this like huge anti-gay, like political movement, right? You know, and of course, since it was the early 80s, it was kind of both extremely anti-gay and extremely campy. Like there's kind of this like Olivia Newton-John element to it, you know. And I'm sure if you go back and watch, you know, some of those clips of Anita Bryant, you know, denouncing homosexuals. There's no homosexuals that listen to this fine podcast. We're all good old boys here, you know, and I'm sure that. And when we listen to Anita Bryant, you know, denouncing the homosexuals, you know, we have to remember that, of course, this was not a fringe. This was a majority perspective at the time, and like as strange as it may seem, and. What happens with all of these things, like banning communism or whatever, you know, there are these sort of spasms, like the spasm of the rabbit in the jaws of the boa constrictor, where you just, at a certain point, you know, the boa, which is trying to swallow you gently to kind of keep your meat tender, you know, the boa is, you realize that you're actually being swallowed by a boa, and you try to bite as hard as you can, but, you know, you're sort of very much living in the moment as that rabbit. So when you look at basically what happens when you do something like this, you're pulling a lot of energy out of people. And you're pulling a lot of energy out of people to pass a law. And indeed, I mean, as I said in this piece, this guy, Chris Rufo, is measured in like the mileage of conservative activism. He's like Michael Jordan and Wayne Gretzky and Tiger Woods put together. It's Tiger Woods actually is the best comparison, because this young guy comes on the scene and just immediately starts dominating, right? And, you know, not only does he basically get this you know, executive ukase, this decree, this imperial rescript from God Emperor Trump, you know, he's gotten laws passed all around the country. And people, you know, there's this feeling, you go out and you pass a law and you're like, you're winning, we've won, right? You know, I mean, and when you look at, you know, what you've done there, you have to remember that one of the easiest kind of tricks of psychological warfare that lets you just effortlessly prevail is if you can persuade your enemy that he's won when he hasn't won anything at all. So when you look at, you know, what is the impact of these laws or whatever, well, you know, imagine them, first of all, like a law is not a law unless it's enforced by a court, right? What is a court? Mm-hmm. A court is a judge. What is a judge? A judge is a law professor in a black polyester muumuu, right? So, you know, you're basically, you know, you're basically saying, oh, we passed this law, there will be some, maybe there'll be like a court case. I mean, this is literally what went on with the Scopes monkey trial. Right, the state of Tennessee passed a law against teaching, you know, evolution, you know, then young Scopes teaches evolution, and it's this huge shit show. And, you know, it's, of course, the idea that, you know, really Tennessee, I think it was Tennessee, would maintain like gulags of, you know, evolution teaching like high school teachers, you know, Yankees who came down with these theories, right, about men being related to apes. And you know, like, of course, this is just like, it's the sort of dying gasp. And so what you see in these dying gasps is that they basically allow people who are conservative activists to feel very, very good about themselves and to basically get a lot of attention and a lot of energy for doing something that's not, you know, sort of without concrete effect. And I think if you talk to most of these people, they would agree that their actions are without concrete effect, but they have this kind of thing, you know, in a computer science context, this is called, I think specifically with respect to AI, it's called the first step fallacy. It's like basically like, oh, here you have this big problem, but if you take something that seems to be a step towards solving this problem, you've basically done a good thing. So they're like, oh, now we'll take over, you know, school boards. We'll get school boards elected on these, you know, on these principles. And it's like, you know, man, if this were the kind of country where like school boards diligently controlled and managed the education of the community's, children, like fucking some Norman Rockwell town out of 1832, the townsmen all come together and they're like, should our little children be taught evolution, and what is the school board now? Like the school board now is just a bunch of like random bureaucrats with paper pushing jobs. They're not like, there's no sense of kind of local sovereignty over education. Where would you even start with that? Like you're basically, you're trying to resurrect something. You're trying to resurrect an epiphenomenon of a long-dead society, not by resurrecting the long-dead society, but just by resurrecting the epiphenomenon. So you're like, where are these school boards going to buy their textbooks that are carefully freed from critical race theory? How are they going to comply with state standards, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And you're just, you're conjuring into action this machine that you don't have, and you're conjuring into action, especially a huge amount of energy that you don't have. And I think one of the huge mistakes that people, I believe that basically just about all kinds of conservative activism is a mistake. And in particular, what this mistake does is it burns energy out of people. And so people go and do something and they pass a law and they're like, I've made an impact. And then it turns out they haven't made any impact at all. Really, if they wanted the law to be enforced, they'd have to, I don't know, demonstrate in front of the judge's house or some stupid thing like that, right? And at a certain point, they enter a condition that psychologists know is learned helplessness, where they basically put out a bunch of energy and nothing happens and their energy dies. It's like the Tea Party. Remember the Tea Party? Like the 2010s Tea Party?
Yeah.
Where it just dwindled away. The whole thing just sort of, basically lost its heart on. And the thing about conservative activism, the thing about liberal activism is that it's energizing because you feel this constant feeling of like disrupting and destroying things and gaining power. And you're sort of always gaining a little bit of real power, or you're always damaging your enemies, or you're always damaging the world in some way. And so it's sort of, moreover, the more you break down the world, the easier it is to break down. It's an entropic force. It's like corroding, your car or something. You guys are on the East Coast somewhere, so I think so. You have cars that rust. We don't really rust out here in the West.
Yeah, we have to go to Arizona, every so many years and scoop up all the classic cars for our redneck rides and shit.
That's exactly right. Yeah, you never see a rusty car around here. It's unheard of. It's like seeing a person. Never mind. What was I saying? What I was saying.
Step two would be there's a QAnon deputy sheriff in the classroom, like with his hand on a revolver while this.
Yeah, exactly. Right. The thing is, you're basically. The point is, when you're imagining this Norman Rockwell future, you just rapidly proceed into the world of pure fantasy, where you're basically like, you might as well be like imagining. Remember the underworld, like the '50s underworld from A Boy and His Dog. You guys must have seen A Boy and His Dog. Oh my God! You've never seen A Boy and His Dog? Oh my God!
Sir.
I watched Hitler Lives, which you recommended last time. So we will look into this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the original. This is The Boy and His Dog is made from a Harlan Ellison novella. It stars a young Don Johnson. Don Johnson's like 17 years old, right? and sort of has this kind of. It's like Brad Pitt and Thelma and Louise. He has this kind of innocent young male sexuality, and then they go into like this. It's impossible to describe. It's really like Mad Max on a bad acid trip. It's a great film. In any case, you're imagining, when you try to imagine you're imagining this thing that restoring the past would give you. And instead of thinking, in order to get to this thing, I have to restore the past, you're like, just give me this thing. And this thing of like schools that are organically controlled by the community. There's no community anymore. There's a goddamn suburb. Like every time you hear the word community, it's some kind of euphemism, right? And so, you're not living in the present tense. And when you do these kind of things that are ineffectual, they just burn people out and have no result. Let me give you one example. that I think is more possibly closer to the near and dearer to the hearts of your young, urban readers who are, of course, allies and so forth, but who may live in major cities. I was down in Austin recently with my kids, and we go past, we're driving into Austin, and they're like, wow, this is a real city. And my daughter wants to live in a real city. So, she's like, this is a real city. I'm like, damn straight, it's a real city. And we go past City Hall, and we see this huge row of tents, and my daughter is not a big fan of encampments, right? And so, this makes her down on Austin, which is what I wanted. So, but I mean, we can talk another time about what the sort of the right or the wrong answer is here. The point is that they just had in Austin this campaign called Save Austin Now, where it was basically a civic revolt of people who want to not have encampments in some way, shape, or form against the extremely pro-homeless authorities in Austin. And they had, it was exactly the same thing. We're going to have a referendum to pass a law, and the law will say that you can't, camp on the streets or whatever. And they passed the law, Save Austin Now. They saved Austin. They passed this law 2 months ago. Now what they're attempting to do, I believe, the last time I looked into it, they were attempting to get the state of Texas to pass a law penalizing communities that did not enforce their laws. This is kind of epicycles, but whatever. And what so I talked to a bunch of the people in Austin who, some people who've been kind of peripherally involved in this thing, right? And I reminded them of a piece of history that, in general, they had no idea of, which was the kind of in the early Gavin Newsom era when he was the mayor of San Francisco. We did almost exactly the same thing in the early 2000s. We had a sit-lie ordinance. We passed an ordinance, and it was a huge debate. It was like, and of course it's San Francisco, so they're basically like, the people for this are like, well, we don't really hate homeless people. We just, we care about them. We're looking out for them, for their safety and health. And the people against it are like, you're Nazis. You're Nazis. You want to gas them all. Just admit it. Right? And so, of course, as sometimes happens in these things, even in a place like San Francisco, the sit-lie ordinance wins. Right? And so now, as far as I know, it's still all, against the law in San Francisco to sit and lie on the sidewalks, let alone pitch a motherfucking tent, let alone build quasi-permanent structures, right? Which is what you see in some places now, right?
They have garages and two-story tents and shit now.
Sure, yeah, two-story tents and shit, exactly. And so when you look at this, you say, okay, you basically took a bunch of people's energy and you said, here, it's like the phenomenon of learned helplessness is like you put the rat in the tank and you basically give the rat a platform that it can swim onto and save itself. And it swims onto the platform, and then the platform drops away into the icy water and it's swimming again. And after the third fucking time, this rat doesn't even try to fucking climb on the platform anymore, because what's the fucking point? He's just going to die. He becomes a very pessimistic, nihilistic rat. And this is essentially what happens with sort of many of these kinds of civic revolts, where they're like, oh, just, here's the sort of one thing that's kind of bothering me. And, it's like, that's what you're doing is you're sucking that energy out, and you're sort of profiting from it in many tangible and intangible ways. And you're taking those people's energy and you're dissipating them, and you're not making anything better. Furthermore, you're more than dissipating that energy, because there's really the whole kind of emotional support of oligarchy in this country comes from people who are afraid that they're about to be sent to the concentration camps. And there's a lot of these people in the Bay Area. And every time you have an uprising of the peasants with pitchforks, even however pathetic or ridiculous it is, they're like, because they're so attuned to power, because they're so addicted to power and think so much about power, they just, automatically are like, we are just going to be pitchforked. And I mean, and they start just picturing like the tines, like entering their bellies, like these peasants laughing maniacally, frat boys, raping them on broken glass, like this is their picture of being subjugated.
Yeah, they were genuinely. They were genuinely afraid from the January 6th thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And they were basically all going to get that treatment that woman at the University of Virginia did, when she was raped by the frat boys on the broken glass table that I read about in Rolling Stone. Or was it Rolling? It was Rolling Stone.
It was Rolling Stone.
It was Rolling Stone. And so, these fantasies arise in their minds. And so essentially, you are this tiny insignificant lizard. Like, you just have no power compared to them. But you, through the magic of their lighting their cameras, have been turned into Godzilla. And, to fight this Godzilla, they will bring out the nation's whole police force. They will, and you're just
nuclear
incredibly
bombs,
useful to them.
F-15s.
Yeah, and so you're just incredibly useful to them because you represent, this fear of something real happening to them. You're not actually something real, but you basically keep, sort of the only proper path out of this is that their energy and their support decays, and the young cool kids start, being against them rather than for them, which basically takes them from communist Czechoslovakia in 1946 to communist Czechoslovakia in 1976, right? And so every time you give them this opportunity, every time you give the elites an excuse to be afraid of the townies, that's what's done in this Wallace Wells New Yorker piece on Rufo. It's basically like, my God, the townies are taking control of education. And it's like the townies are not taking control of education. They just smeared their greasy hands on it once. It's still exactly what it is. And that's not going to change. You basically you're participating in this stage show, which objectively makes your side weaker and their side stronger, and you're pretending that its effect on the battlefield is the opposite. Now, your pretense is absolutely genuine. It's not like I love throwing the word grifter around just as a, in a self-deprecating way. I mean, Rufo is no more or less a grifter than I am. He's absolutely and completely sincere, as am I. He's just, I think, wrong. But he's sort of wrong in such an ambitious way and such an interesting way that it sort of starts to come closer to being right. And I think that's what's sort of so refreshing about this at the same time. There is a refreshing, I can see why, for me, shitting on it causes me waves of subscriber cancellations or whatever, but, I don't really care.
What can we say about the president in exile? If he had banned, if he so he didn't ban CRT in the schools. His executive order essentially said you can't, none of these contractors, none of these NGO groups are going to get paid money by the State Department, DOE, whatever.
Well, right. So if you look at even the proximate effect of that decree, okay, what it says is basically it sends a whole bunch of people scurrying to pretend to comply with the decree. And so, what they have to do as a process is they'll have to basically say, it's nugatory now, but you have to say, okay, we're banning critical race theory. What does this actually mean? It means, how do you even define that as a piece of a process, right? And you're defining that as a piece of a process to be implemented supposedly by people who absolutely don't believe in what you're doing. And your executive order is not binding in any sense. It's basically just saying a tweet saying Trump would like to do this. Washington does like to actually pretend to be obeying the president, but there's just no way that you can get, I mean, anything out of. They'll just do more diversity training. They'll just be like, oh yeah, this isn't critical race theory, or like it's so easy to just bureaucratically dodge these things. It's like a bull, charging a matador. You're just like, there's like, you think you can beat a bureaucrat this way? I mean, like, my God, right? And so the gesture itself has this kind of futility to it that I think is also very damaging, because even if you don't sort of pour your energy into it and recognize that it's futile, even if you sort of look at it from the outside and be like, oh yeah, that could never possibly work because it just doesn't align with your reality, that's something. There's also, the other thing that's amazing, about it to me is that even the sort of the negative quality of it has this defeatist, sense. It's like, to say you should not teach critical race theory is to say, well, what should you teach? What do you teach about race? What should you teach about race? Can we, what does Chris Rufo think about that? Could he put forth a curriculum? This wasn't my idea. I was chatting with a friend, which is, I think a much more interesting and creative way to combat critical race theory as we know it. It's a technique that actually Microsoft first pioneered, which is called extend and embrace. So, basically, for example, have you ever been called a racist? I think that happens to a lot of people. I'm not exactly sure what the word means these days. Certainly people have called me a racist. But what if, anytime you were called a racist, you sort of could gently correct your interlocutor and you could say, no, actually, I'm a critical race theorist. Right. And so what you're doing is you're taking critical race theory and you're repurposing it. You're saying, no, we're going to accept critical race theory. We're going to wade into it. We're going to create a new critical race theory. This is going to be a critical race theory that's aligned with the science. This is going to be a critical race theory that's data-based. And
get Steve Saylor on it.
We're going to have a completely general critical race theory. We're going to know how to criticize any race, any mix of races. We're going to have we're going to revolutionize critical race theory, and all that we're going to ask is
have 5-year-olds separating Ashkenazi from, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly. Like those old World War, like for me, critical race theory is really, it's like, those old World War II posters, how to tell a Chinese from a Japanese, right? I mean, and if you can't do that, right? I mean, that's like Johnny can't add, material, right? I mean, and so, this like the thing is that way of, you're not opposing critical race theory, you're extending and embracing it. That way of sort of handling this problem, which is just sort of one of many kinds of approaches that could be taken. It's lighthearted, it's fun, it's like it's not sort of butt hurt. And when you're basically just like saying my butt hurts because you're teaching me, this bullshit. It's like, one. I mean, of course it's bullshit. Like, you might have noticed that maybe there's some other bullshit in the schools. Why don't you, maybe you're going to broaden your anti-bullshit campaign to, it's just like, the sort of the negativity of it is so profound. And when you're basically, the whole thing is a complaint. And complaining is beta. And if you want to be madder at all in history, just don't be beta. It's embarrassing. It's really sad.
So, let's play devil's advocate here. So,
I've been running around basically making a saying this banning CRT stuff is good. And
okay.
So now
that's great.
But however,
our conflict is at last out in the open.
Right. This is okay. So, but this first
normal people did. In your piece, you say that the CRT is essentially the the common belief for every educated and important person already. Like, this is not a new wild thing. They all believe they received this programming along decades ago.
Well, it depends where you were. I certainly got it decades ago at Brown. Right. It depends where you were and who you were and how cool you were. It's certainly just gone crazy more mainstream in the last 5 years, but there's always been you've always had to accept its existence. You've always had to condone it. You've always had to know that it was there. And, in a certain sense, that knowledge creates your complicity, right? If you're a math professor and you know that your math is it's great math, it's perfectly good, everything you teach is true, all your proofs work out. But down the hall, in the room across the hall, what they're doing in that classroom seems, to you to make a real mockery of scholarship. But that's okay because not your problem.
Marketplace of ideas. Yeah, well, we get this all the time where people say, hey, this is just a theory. It's not, hey, that doesn't mean anything. It could be, there might be other crazy theories, but they all go in the same direction. But that's beside the point.
So you've basically you've condoned it already, and at that point you've already kind of lost the battle in a sense.
Well, someone like Rufo isn't my dad did not know what critical race theory was until recently.
Well, what's your dad's position in the great food chain? Does he sweep up the floors in an Albertsons? Is he the governor of Minnesota? What's your dad's cultural background?
Right. Okay. But in your piece, you're talking about we're going to restore the Stuarts eventually, right? That's the long term goal, right? Right?
Die, Siri.
Pardon? Could you repeat that?
Sorry, Siri hijacked my audio, and for a moment I was talking to Siri. I was asking what your dad's cultural background was, whether he sweeps the floors at an Albertsons or is the governor of Minnesota.
I get your point. But
yes, excellent. I think yes. I wish I could get my son into the trades, but
master electrician. He doesn't work. That's
yeah. So the master electricians don't really know, but this is something that has of course this is a food chain that has been going on for a long time, where the master electricians are even when they vastly outnumbered the fucking Brahmins. The
kulaks.
The kulaks. Even when they vastly outnumbered the kulaks, when the kulaks vastly outnumbered, the nobles. The nobles were the kulaks eventually wound up believing whatever the nobles believed, right? So you see the the trend just passing through everything in every cultural trope. The ruling class, cultural preferences and intellectual preferences are a leading indicator. So you're always so essentially for the master electricians of the world. Can you still hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, I thought Siri might have jacked me again. But I gotta figure out how to turn that shit off. But in any case, you're to reverse that. And to say, no, the elites will be the takers of power. And, it's and we, the master electricians, will begin to rule. I mean, the closest thing to that is something like the Iranian Revolution, right? Where basically the civil society of Iran just gets fucking mullahd, right? And the thing is, if you have the energy of the mullah supporting class in Iran in the 70s, and you compare that to the energy of suburban soccer moms, that's 200 to 1, right? So you're basically trying to get drunk on barely fermented apple cider here. You have so little energy in the population. The way I usually say it is you're trying to run a car on apple juice. Sorry? Sorry?
Okay, so there's not enough energy. You're specifically talking about suburban soccer moms, whatever.
Suburban soccer moms. Suburban soccer moms are not going to install the Iranian Revolution and put in Pat Robertson Jr. to like start hanging gays all over the country.
If you tell them that they're fucking
happen.
with their kids, that they're fucking with their kids in school, you don't think that can create some energy? Like, that's the one thing that you would imagine could create some energy.
You can create, sure, you can create a little bit of energy, but you've been trying that for many, many years. And the thing is, you get a little bit of blood flowing, but it's not as much blood flowing as they need to actually create any kind of structural change. It's only as much blood is flowing as is needed to do some kind of fake shit. So basically that blood flows, the fake shit happens, and then next time you're like, should I really do this again? Because nothing happened. And so, you
Reagan,
can get their...
basically.
Yeah, Reagan, basically. So it's like you can get their blood flowing, but the thing is you're kind of grifting them. And I kind of don't like that because my sympathies are with these motherfuckers, like sad as they may be. I'm a traitor to my class. And I'm just like, man, these people are getting fucked. And so, basically from that perspective, the way I think about this problem is very, very simple. You're basically building an amplifier here. You want to take the very limited amount of energy that the modern, soccer mom person who feels that doesn't really like encampments, whatever, the sort of modern kind of casual conservative, and you want to maximize the structural impact of that very low amount of energy. So, rather than saying, okay, we're going to do something, because the essentialist, the essential kind of axiom in your theorem of this is a good idea is we're going to do something and it's going to create energy to do something bigger. And the only reason that you believe that is that it's basically worked for kind of many generations of revolutionaries, but you're actually not a revolutionary, you're actually a reactionary, and it's just not going to work for you. Also, a lot of other great things like revolutionaries don't work for you, like having like demonstrations to take over public buildings.
I've got a different way to go with this. Okay, so and let's. It really, Rufo is not really where I'm thinking here. It really, the executor of something that would work, and the guy who, I guess, the story that made me immediately think, I was like, I got to go back to my Yarvin here. Is when Mr. DeSantis was like, I'm going to do an audit of what all these professors are thinking. But here's where argument. Okay, so when you get on an airplane, there's these people that frisk you,
right?
Let's forget trying to restore the Stewarts. Imagine just trying to get rid of those people.
Right.
They have like a fucking union now and shit, right? So we'll never get rid of these motherfuckers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, never. No empire is forever. That's. The one of the things that I sort of like to start saying is that big things are easier than small things. Big things are easier than small things because you're absolutely right. You'll never get rid of these people because they have a union, et cetera, and you'll never get rid of any. You can never get rid of any government, department, right? The only way you can get rid of any government department, therefore.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So and that's why big things are easier than small things. The big things are actually quite hard, but the small things are just freaking impossible, right? And so the thing is that when I see someone basically pulling energy out of the public to lead them into a box canyon, and I know it's a box canyon, and I'm just like, no, like this is not right. Please do not lead people into this box canyon, even though it feels, it's fun to like go on the like chanting, crowd waving flags into the box canyon, but it's not really accomplishing something. And, worse, and in some ways, the most negative accomplishment that it has is that it basically convinces you implicitly, because you're assuming implicitly that everything is fixable and everything is basically fine. And so you're saying, because even the people who are fighting, the critical race theory battle agree by definition, otherwise why would they be asking for a law? They believe that this system can be changed to abolish this abuse. And if they don't believe that this system can be changed to abolish this abuse, then you're basically like, okay, wow, you really are a grifter. But if you believe that that this is an abuse and that the system, can be changed to accommodate it, that's a very reasonable reason to say, no, let's repair the system rather than replacing it. And that's based on an illusion. So you're actually your objective accomplishment is to essentially defend the regime by flattering the regime in a way that it simply doesn't deserve, because you're flattering it by telling all of your supporters who actually hate what it's doing that it is nonetheless so good that it can stop what it's doing. And it's just not.
Right. So if we want to get rid of the guys that frisk us at the airport, then we need best case, we want an emperor of the United States. We would settle for someone who's basically has replaced the most political positions with lackeys, or who tells the Supreme Court to fuck off, something like this. Maybe in like maybe it wouldn't be exactly 0 AD. Here's the new United States empire, but maybe it's just someone who's just sort of doing stuff, and the political system is just like, I wish he wouldn't do that, but he's just doing stuff, and we can't stop him.
I would. That's not quite the right way to picture it. The right way to picture it is, he's elected, by promising a revolution, perhaps in somewhat vague terms. And, here comes, he's elected and he's inaugurated. And, while he's speaking, while he's taking his oath, things are already starting to happen. He has a plan for exactly what to do. And, a month after this event, not only will these institutions not exist, no one could imagine them existing again. It's like a month after the fall of East Germany. Can anyone imagine the Stasi reopening for business? No, completely impossible. And so you're essentially you're the way that any such revolution needs to proceed is that it needs to keep its opponents completely demoralized at all points. This is basically, this is so, and the thing is, when you do a little thing, it's like Trump takes office, and they're genuinely worried that Trump, could do really essentially exactly this. He could just lock the doors on the deep state, right, and just lock them out, and seize command of the country and bring his people into the streets if he had any problems anywhere from anyone, and this is exactly, if Trump had been the thing that Trump was the cartoon of, this is exactly what he would have done. Of course, he was completely incapable of it. But
guys
that's what
with AKs stormed the Treasury. It's basically
exactly. U.S. Marshals at the Fed. Basically, as quickly as possible, you create a security force that's completely loyal to you, and sort of defy anyone to shoot back at them. You start, you basically decapitate the existing chain of command by taking anyone who thinks he has the political right to order people around in defiance of you and putting them in a nice hotel on Guam, and you just proceed like
what FDR did, basically.
Well, I think what FDR did with a little bit more edge, because it was a very different situation in some ways. FDR didn't even have a mandate to do his 100 days thing. He basically governed in the totally opposite direction that he promised. But the sense of
his Praetorian Guard is basically the cathedral. Yes.
Yes, essentially, he has this massive Praetorian Guard. Okay, that's important. That's not necessarily, he has this massive intellectual Praetorian Guard full of, people. It's not just intellectuals; these are truly very capable motherfuckers, right? And he could get shit done. He was Washington really did a lot of things at startup speed back then, and so you're basically what you're doing in this kind of constitutional regime change, which you've brought about by electing a constitutional president, as I never tire of repeating, is a president who's actually the chief executive of the executive branch, and very simple. And once you elect a constitutional president, the constitutional president basically looks at Washington, and you should try this on any DC person you happen to meet. You should just be there isn't actually an executive branch in DC. What we call it the executive branch, but it's actually the legislative branch. It actually is managed by Congress, and only fake managed by the White House. And, like, whoever heard of, like, agency officials testifying before the White House, right? Their budget is micromanaged by Congress down to, like, incredibly fine line items. Like, their personnel is, their relationship with Congress, or rather the congressional staffs, is incredibly deep. With the president, it's incredibly shallow. So, and when you look at this, basically, this legislative branch, which is a legislative bureaucracy, you're like, no, we have a constitution that says we should have an executive branch. What at present we have, in reality, due to various usurpations and, frankly, mistaken interpretations of the Constitution, is the legislative branch. Therefore, we're going to, shut down the legislative branch. We're going to retire all government employees, RAGE, and one of my favorite acronyms. I think it's time for I first when I came up with this acronym in 2012, I was like, it's too early for this acronym, but I think now is good. And so you're going to retire all government employees. You're basically going to say we're shutting down the legislative branch, and we are creating a new executive branch, which is staffed entirely from scratch. And actually just exists just to do its job, not to be this bizarre collection of self-licking ice cream cones. And that is what you're going to get if you elect me president. And if you don't want that, you should definitely vote for my opponent. And that's your, if you're elected with that mandate, they're just going to lose all hope immediately. It's going to be a self-coup. They're going to run for their lives. Everyone's sort of camouflaged, preference falsified guilt about what a shit show this regime was will come to the surface, and they will just lose their hard-ons universally. This is what there's no like world of like former Stasi employees where they're like conspiring to have like a revolutionary conspiracy to bring back the DDR. No, it does not work that way. Once you're dead, you're dead. And that's, the sooner and faster you get an old regime to that point of just collapse, like you have to have that Humpty Dumpty moment. And until you have the Humpty Dumpty moment, you're basically not doing anything. You're actually doing something where the closer you get to, fucking around with Humpty Dumpty without getting him off the wall, like the worse it's going to be for you when all the fucking king's horses and all the king's men show up. And that's,
you kill Caesar and it doesn't really matter. It's too late.
Yeah, it's too late. Right. So
do you think Huey Long? Sorry, go ahead.
Anyway, I was just going to sum up and say that's kind of my perception of these Rufo-like efforts. Now, of course, that's a very unusual perception that most people don't share. You were going to go on about Huey Long.
Oh well. Let me go back to this argument here. Okay, so why is this machine so powerful, right? So these relationships, these people, these government employees you can't get rid of, right? And by the way, in the meantime, we have this elite overproduction thing, right? So there are just a fucking bazillion people running around with law degrees, and
that's right. It's a plague.
They're burning down cities and shit until they can get a juicy government job where they can sit at home on COVID restrictions forever, right?
Yeah, right. It's super gay.
It looks like they're like calling in like a lot of favors to get. There is a lot of panic around this CRT thing, I believe.
Well, this is exactly the point. The panic is a false signal that you're misreading. So the panic is basically you've created this lizard, and the lizard is promptly amplified by the television tricks of CNN into a mighty Komodo dragon. Or even Godzilla himself. And so you're basically like, we're doing something because they're afraid of us is never almost, we really pissed them off, we really scared them, is almost never right, because basically what they've done is they've taken your impact and magnified it like basically infinitely in order to, get their like blue and on supporters to send more money.
So well, here's what you gotta black pill me on. Okay, so what I'm imagining is that one of the great strengths of this regime is that there's a lot of people hanging around saying, "Gee, we're gonna get a sinecure as soon as people, let's say in Florida, say this guy DeSantis, he's running around, and the easy way to beat my argument, you kind of got ahead with that the thing that's like, well, we'll just redirect it to this thing called diversity and inclusion, right? Because
right.
By the way, there's this CRT. What is it? So this is like this. It's the same ideology bringer. However, this is a formal version drawn up by attorneys that accepts cash or card, right? So this is like, the Army will bring in someone to perform trainings on this. However, like the thing is, all this is already legal to do this under this thing called diversity and inclusion. Right. However, I think they were going to.
So you're imagining. You're imagining your policy as personnel, right? So basically, if you're imagining that these diversity trainings will stop, which is very unlikely, or you're imagining that they will be reformed, maybe to instead of, or at least to give equal time to my new critical race theory, which I think all we new wave critical race theorists want is equal time, and I think that's completely fair. And then if you're imagining this like not happening, you're imagining some completely imaginary body of people who look at these DEI training or DIE training materials and are like, well, this doesn't pass muster because I'm going to judge that this is, critical race theory. It's like the Supreme Court recognizing porn. I don't know what critical race theory is, but I know it when I see it. And you're going to ascribe, personal responsibility to this cadre of right-wing anti-critical race theorists, or hopefully maybe they're all Mormons or something, clean-cut young men. And to get a license to do DEI training, you've got to pass the Mormon test. It's all just a complete fantasy, right? You're passing this law, and there's no one in the government who wants to enforce this piece of paper that you've passed. Right.
The last 2 years have showed people anything. It's that the laws don't matter. It matters who's enforcing them, and they get to decide. Like the sovereign gets to decide.
So another thing, for example, I forget who said it, that all modern political diseases originate in Canada. I don't think that's true, but they always infect the Canadians, worse. And they always, when we catch a cold, they catch the flu, right? When we catch the flu, they get COVID. And man, did they have COVID? And one of the things that the U.S. has kind of so far been spared, although our judicial system has really taken up the slack on this, is something called the Human Rights Commission. This is a completely separate judicial system that the Canadians created in order to enforce basically woke Stalinism. And, I hate using the word woke because have you noticed that woke people don't say woke anymore?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So don't say woke anymore. I try not to do that. But, it's basically these human rights commissions essentially enforce, the ideology of the 1960s, whatever you want to call it, on everyone. And it's a parallel judicial system that can impose fines. Right. Mm-hmm. So you're essentially like, this is basically pure revolutionary justice. Now, the Revolutionary Court cannot order you executed or, banished to Sardinia or whatever the fuck. But,
they can take your money, which is what they want.
They can take your money and destroy your life. And so if you imagine, you're like, okay, let's do leftism in the opposite direction. How do we fix this? What we need is basically the equivalent of human rights commissions, but for the abolition of critical race theory, or rather, its replacement with NCRT, new critical race theory. The N is small; it's like mRNA.
Title 88 commissions.
Title 88 Commission, right? And so basically you have have these Title 88 dear colleague letters. This is just such a classy podcast. I love coming on here because you guys are so classy, right? And so, essentially you have a whole crew of like former, Patriot Front members, they've cleaned up their act and they're now members, they were kids, right? And later we all learned that the way to defeat radical right-wing terrorism is to support moderate radical right-wingers. And so they they grew their hair out, they got wives and kids, they went back to law school, they became Mormons, and now they're ready to enforce our new critical race theory. And so basically what we're going to do is you're going to have actually have the equivalent of human rights, commissions. So if in your workplace, basically, if critical race theory is being taught or any of that, you can basically file a lawsuit in this, court saying, hey, there's critical race theory in my workplace. This is unacceptable, and it will be heard, before these basically Mormon judges, right? These people who 10 years ago were alt-righters, like pouring milk all over their faces or whatever, right? And you just you have no choice, right? And these guys, they're going to laugh at you and make okay signs as they fine your life away, right? And that's if you really wanted to reverse the the battlefield, which of course is ridiculous and impossible, that's what you'd be doing, but you're not actually doing anything like that.
So what if you become governor of a large state and you start taking these things like this and you say, we're just going to take all this money that goes to these diversity trainings, we're going to divert it to fat Italian guys who walk around construction sites checking for workplace safety.
I think you'd very quickly be made to realize that you were violating the law. There would be a number of ways that they would do that. But the ability of, it's sort of interesting to question the ability of, first of all, as a governor, you're as a governor, are you just some guy who got elected governor and then went crazy in a Hollywood movie, or do you have a whole state, devoted to you and hanging on your every word and following you the way the Rajneeshis followed Rajneesh? And in America today, maybe even Huey Long, right? You mentioned Huey Long earlier,
Yes.
you were going to go to Huey Long. And the thing is, even when you look at the age of Huey Long, which is not exactly the late 18th century, even when you look at the age of Huey Long, the capacity of the American public for collective action has vastly declined between that and the Civil War, for example, right? And so the idea of Huey Long basically, when you compare Huey Long to Jefferson Davis, you sense, that the level of kind of sovereign ambition in the 1860s is, of course, much, much greater. And the level of sovereign ambition you see in Huey Long and the level of sort of political, populist, democratic energy that you have behind Huey Long, you don't see anymore. So I don't think Huey Long, for example, ever formed a militia. Of course, militias were obviously a huge normal thing, back in the 1860s. Abraham Lincoln. I always like to shock people by pointing them to the Wikipedia page for Abraham Lincoln's paramilitary militia, the Wide Awakes. And people read this and they're just like, "Holy God, how have I never heard of this?" He has he has basically his own SA of 500,000 uniformed paramilitaries. No one talks about this, and so when you're basically designing political solutions for a world where you have all these armed men who are ready to kill and die for the collective, and you compare that to now where you have just this kind of world of faggots who've never even been in a fist fight. I've never been in a fist fight. Have you been in a fist fight? As an adult? Oh, okay. That's right. That's because you're rednecks. Okay, but the thing is, you have that one up on me. Irish, same thing. I mean, it's basically, that's where the bog comes from. I suppose.
Irish are less than people. No,
exactly. It's sort of two-legged. I mean, they have two legs and they don't and no feathers. But so in that sense, definitely people. Actually, I'm reminded by that of a kind of an old work of critical race theory that I was reading, or it dabbles in critical race theory, which was a travelogue of a British journalist who went through the United States in the 1780s, I think, not the 1880s. And he's he's taking the railroad down from the north to the south. And basically, he's listening to this Yankee from Boston, like a real Yankee, complaining about the goddamn Irish. And the Irish are this, the Irish are that, they're shiftless, they're lazy, they're, yada, yada, yada. And the guy across the seat is like, well, wait till you meet our African Americans, and that of course is presages the journalist is telling a story. Of course, this is a colonialist narrative, right? But of course, this joke is confirmed in the colonialist narrative that we later read, and which I'm not, of course, I would not condone.
Have you heard of Desmond Fennell?
Desmond Fennell? No, I have not.
Yeah, we had
Angela Nagel.
We had Angela Nagel on, and she talked. There was a guy. I don't know. I thought of it. You said he was a travel. This was some Irish travel writer long ago, and he wrote a lot of the similar ideas from your work. It's kind of interesting that travel. Guys,
that is so interesting. How is it spelled? Yeah, I love to read especially old travel guides to my own country, because it shows you how others perceived it rather than how it perceived itself. Which is generally more interesting, especially when you're dealing with extremely delusional people. And the same has always been true of America. We've always been the world's most delusional country. And that's the most American thing of all. So yeah, when was this guy writing, and how do you spell his name? Dennis Fennell?
Desmond.
Desmond.
F-E-N-N-E-L-L.
Yeah.
Fennell. Okay, yeah. Like the vegetable, but with another L.
Yeah, he's just sort of tooling around the United States. He's reviewing high-end restaurants and stuff. And in the meantime, he's just laying out this kind of proto-NRX stuff. It's which I think you could only do that.
Absolutely bitching.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
okay.
That's that.
So you want to rule the United States, but the power.
Oh no! I have no intention of ruling the United States.
Right.
I'm a member of the. I'm like the. I'm not Aragorn. I'm Gandalf, right?
Right.
I'm like the guy who. I just have ideas, man. I mean, my God. I'm a terrible manager. I mean, I can't even manage a company of 20 people properly. So what? No, definitely not. Sorry.
Okay, so one might want to rule the United States with an iron fist. And by the way, do you when people talk about Huey Long, they talk about it well, how did he think about X policy or not? I just look at it as I want to rule. And that's what I'm going.
No, it's not even just I want to rule. Everybody wants to rule. What's really important is I have the right to rule. And this is one of the things about, if I can go back and pick on poor Rufo, a little more. I'm basically when you say this shall not be taught, what you're saying is I shall not be ruled in this way. What you're really saying is you're causing me some irritation, some rectal irritation here, and I wish you would remove the source of rectal irritation. And one of my metaphors is kind of, it's a strongly flavored metaphor. It's not really a family metaphor, but is this a family podcast? This is not a family podcast. You can let loose. Okay. I'll let loose. So, since this is not a family podcast, one of my favorite analogies is of a man in a deep coma who can only barely, he's still alive, he has sort of locked-in syndrome, he's still thinking, he can only barely perceive anything about the world or even his senses, but he's perfectly conscious, right? And, all of a sudden he begins to perceive this pain, this rubbing, sort of tearing pain coming from down below. And really, what's going on is he's so deeply anesthetized, he's so deeply in a coma that what he doesn't realize is not just that he thinks that there's something new that's going on. actually nothing new is going on, and basically he's just constantly being anally raped. But this time he's being anally raped with a special brutality. And so his answer is not, will you stop ass raping me in my narcotic sleep? His answer was, will you stop ass raping me this hard in my narcotic sleep? Right? And if you understand that, does that analogy make any sense? Does it resonate? Does it resonate?
That's horrifying.
No, absolutely. Yeah. This is one of the more disturbing thing about the male psyche is that males can experience full sexual release under a comatose situation. Just like pure.
That is very true. That is true. That is true. And there is many males experience a satisfaction. I'm not one of them, from being penetrated. And so this sense of being you're asleep, you're sort of covered by warmth, and then there's this feeling of penetration, which is, in a way, it's kind of satisfying, but also it can be painful. But you're being dominated. You don't have to worry about anything. They bring you food. They wipe your butt. This is the state of the Amerikaner, as I sometimes say, who just wants the grill. And so when you tell these people, like, here is the solution to receive, you sell them basically like hemorrhoid cream that will relieve some of the discomfort, from this, these intrusions, and, it's really.
You ever been to Chick-fil-A?
Actually, it's strange that you would say that, because I actually have not been to Chick-fil-A. I like to eat the cows, and the more the cows give me this stuff about don't eat me, I'm like, yeah, I think I'll hit the In-N-Out. And my children prefer the burger too. So yeah, sorry, cows.
If you go there, you'll see all these beautiful blonde-haired kulak wives driving enormous 8,000-pound Suburbans. They all have Q stickers on the back, and if you want to think about like just getting anally violated, think about. I mean, but they're still into it. Like this guy's been.
Well, as I always say, I stole this from someone too, but as I always say, the real conspiracy theory is. In Q is not that we're ruled by degenerate pedophiles, but that there's a secret conspiracy to stop it. Right?
Jeff Andrew, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean the amount of cope there is just like, it's interstellar cope. And so I'm like, the thing that conservatives have to realize is that the main thing that's holding them back is cope. If they could just walk away from their cope, like, they would be totally fine. And so when I look at, the anti-CRT campaign, I'm like, on a relative basis, I see what you see in it, because basically it's much less copey than almost anything these people do, but it's still full of cope.
Okay, so let's compare Rufo to, like, I don't know much about the guy, but like, have you ever heard of Corey DeAngelis? Like,
no, I've never heard of Corey DeAngelis.
Let's say he's the Chris Rufo, but of they call what they now call euphemistically school choice, right? They're trying to get all these bills passed in states that essentially will take public school money and give it to the kulaks, so they can give it to private schools. Now, I'm a little more favorable to that, and I'll tell you why. I'm a little more favorable to that because essentially, what we're really talking about here is kind of in a military sense the difference between tactics and strategy. And essentially, a tactical measure is good if it makes your strategic problem easier. And it's bad if it makes your strategic problem harder. And so when you basically say, okay, we're going to use this to substantively create, a new, very large numbers of people who have not been brainwashed with this weird ass shit. You're like, that's a substantive victory, and it's a substantive victory that doesn't bear fruit in the sort of lefty way of saying, oh, we've got these people on the run, we're going to move on to bigger victories. It's just a victory in and of itself, but it's a victory that sort of creates a real step upward toward weakening the system that is hard to reverse.
You're taking their money.
Exactly. You're going into their
taking
camp
their money,
taking their supplies.
You're going into their camp and stealing their horses. And the thing is, basically, a really objective way to monitor these efforts is to basically say, okay, what is the objective result of this thing we just did? Is the objective result to attrit their personnel? I'm not sure if attrit is really a verb, but they use it as a verb in the Pentagon. It's like the verb of attrition. Is the goal to attrit? Obviously, it's a euphemism. Is the goal to attrit their personnel? Okay, how many personnel have you attritted? How many people has Chris Rufo gotten fired?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And okay, so you're not doing that. Then the goal is to basically employ our personnel. How many people has Chris Rufo gotten hired? Okay, down to that. Then you're like, okay, the goal is to go into their camp and steal their horses. How much money and stuff has Chris Rufo appropriated for our side? And that's where Corey and DeAngelis and Chris Rufo part company, because, yeah, he actually went into their, like, those laws are real. Those laws have been passed. I mean, I can homeschool because, some dickwad went to the mat against the Nevada. Oh my God, I said that on the air. I said Nevada on the air.
Okay, we can cut it out.
This is not... Okay.
We do Lafayette down here. That's how you tell who's not from around the way.
No. You understand? You don't understand. Anyone who's not from Nevada says Nevada. So it's like this infallible shibboleth. And so if I can redeem myself for a moment, actually, in the eyes of patriotic Nevadans, what I'd like to say is I think there's something that we've all of us Nevadans have seen, but maybe haven't really thought deeply enough about, is that if you stand in western Nevada and you look out, you see these mountains, and I'm always like, I'll point to these mountains and I'll be like, what are these mountains called? And people would be like, well, they're the Sierras. I'm like, yes. What are they called? They're like the Sierra. I'm like, that's right. They're the Sierra Nevada. In fact, not only on the other side of the border is there a Sierra Nevada, there is a Nevada City, there is a Nevada County, and this is what we used to call, back Italians used to call, this is Nevada Irredenta. This is unredeemed Nevada. This is actually occupied Nevada territory.
It's Greater Nevada, yeah. Greater
Nevada. Well, I'm a member of the Greater Nevada Credit Union. I sort of choose to choose it to mean more than it does. But the thing is, when you start to imagine real Nevada pride, you start to imagine people looking at the state of affairs, and none of this territory is at all has anything culturally in common with California. I mean, and my God, right? Nobody wears masks in that territory, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this is Nevada territory, and yet they're paying taxes to. Okay, so like this is the kind of political change that I would love to see. Who's going to resist the Nevada State Police if they go and take it? And I'm joking, of course, and it's a joke like my theory of how Chris Rufo has his new critical race theory, human rights commissions to enforce the white rights or whatever it is. I'm sure he wouldn't endorse the phrase white rights, but
no, he's not a fan of talking about white people.
He's not a fan of such. So the thing is that when you imagine, one of the things that sort of conclusions that I recently came to, and this is a conclusion that is going to offend some friends of mine, but that's my role. That's why I'm such a good grifter. That's how I build trust, is by offending my friends. And one of the things I would say is that sort of any kind of attempt at secession or exit, or any of the things that you see coded like that, is essentially a cope for, even like colonizing Mars in some ways, is a cope for, I want a revolution, but I can't really think about how to say it. And, what you see when you imagine Texas.
Painting a target on yourself too, by the way.
You're painting a target on yourself, and you're imagining, it's very similar to my, you're not knocking Humpty Dumpty off the wall, critique of the anti-CRT campaign. Because what you're saying when you say, let's forget Greater Nevada, let's take a less fantastic case of New Texas. And when you're saying, I want Texas independence, what you're saying is, I have a theory of government which I believe gives me a right to rule Texas. It's all about, to go back to something you said 5 minutes ago, it's all about the right to rule. Do I have the right to rule Texas? Do I have the right to rule Nevada? And what gives me the right to rule anywhere or anything is the knowledge that I know how to do it, and I know how to do it far better than it's currently being done. And anyone who feels that sense of right is like, yeah, I do have the right to rule. And what you're saying, the thing about whether it's the anti-CRT campaign is not saying, I have the right to decide how children are educated. Here is my formula for how children should be educated. We're going to do full Victorian immersion for everyone. They're going to wear little Victorian uniforms, or we're going to do Persian immersion, and we're going to teach them, the way Xenophon describes it. We're only going to teach them to ride, shoot and tell the truth, and or whatever. Here's what we're going to do. But when you say here's what you should not do, you're basically you're saying I have no agency. Just please don't fuck me that hard. And I'm just like, first of all, even when you're like, I'm Texas, when you're talking about like, Texit, and you're like Texas secession, you're basically like, I am Texas, and you may not fuck me anymore. But even that of like, please, you may not fuck me anymore, is very far from saying, actually, I have the right to rule you. Not only do I, Texas, know how Texas should be ruled, I also know how Massachusetts should be ruled. I know how San Francisco should be ruled. Sorry? I'll be the big spoon. I'll be the big spoon, right? Roll over, Massachusetts. It's your turn.
By the way, this guy in Florida said replace CRT with like 3 months talking about like the Holodomor and shit like this.
Yeah. And it's still, it's positive, but it's still like, it's still very, very weak. And the sort of the bigger,
the weakest Republicans are the ones who meditate on communism the most.
Yeah. It's passe, right? They meditate on, early on, anti-communism made this fatal mistake of basically saying that it was not an ideological effort, it was a nationalist effort. And they identified communism with Moscow. And, I've got news for any students of communism. It actually didn't come from Moscow. It came from the West to Moscow. And so the real problem is not Moscow. The real problem is the American allies of Moscow. And furthermore, what happened is those American allies of Moscow basically all broke with Moscow in 1946. And so you're basically, and now they all claim to be anti-communist, just like you. Except strangely, they're also anti-communists. And so you've basically gone down this grifty route of selling something where it's easier to sell this. It is easier to sell, this like nationalist, like the Russians are. I mean, fuck, the Democrats are like, we're pitching this in like 2017, like the Russians are coming to suck your blood. Like, oh yeah, this is what people out there in the Midwest believe. They believe the Russians are coming to suck our blood. So let's go with that one, right? It's like, it's so like incredibly cynical. Yeah,
like
it's so incredible.
Yeah,
like Hitler lives, right? It's so incredibly cynical and sad, and you can't fall for those tricks. And when you say to people instead, your pitch is like, the pitch of any revolution has to be, we're going to try to express what the next world will look like. In some ways, we can't really express this, but what we want you to do is to come to the voting booth and vote one time on one thing, and if you vote properly and everyone agrees that you want this, everything about this world will change. I mean, when you see a regime change like the East Germany turning into the new Germany, right, everyone's life changes. Everything, like, no one is like shot in the street or anything like that. It's completely velvet revolution. Nobody's even like, like if you were a Stasi officer, the Federal Republic of Germany is paying your pension right now. In fact, there are still Wehrmacht officers, I'm pretty sure, whose pension is still being paid, right? And so, that sort of sense of continuity of staff, it's like the most important thing in any kind of real revolution that actually works, especially in the modern world with its just pathological aversion to bloodshed, is that it's just like no one can be blamed for serving the old regime. Right, if you worked at if you were the American equivalent of a Stasi officer, let's say you worked at the SPLC. what's going to happen to the staff of the SPLC, right? Well,
they're going to be the prime minister of Germany.
Well, yeah, if they go, if they do it like that, but no, we're talking about my kind of revolution, and in my kind of revolution, what happens to you if you were used to work for the SPLC? Well, certainly you're a public figure. It can't be not known that you worked for the SPLC, so that's going to limit a lot of your possibilities. Hopefully, the SPLC has a defined benefit pension. It's certainly going to be deemed as a government agency. It clearly is a government agency. And so as a government agency, it's basically going to be retired in an effective and really generous way. So you definitely, if you're retiring people in a way that they don't expect and couldn't have expected, and you're not trying to punish them, not only do you want to pay them their accrued retirement benefits, you want to bonus that. You want to pay them even more. You want to put all of your enemies in a position where they can't actually help but be a little kind of happy that this thing is over. Because most of them probably hate their jobs anyway, right? So you're basically saying, I'm going to take your accrued retirement benefits, or if you're a quasi-government agency like this, we're going to say, okay, how long have you worked here? How long would you have been, what would you have accrued if you were a government employee? And we're going to give you that in a lump sum. We're going to, actually 20s. We're going to have a guy show up at your house with a briefcase full of 20s. He's going to take a picture of you standing next to this briefcase. Of course, you're free to refuse this money. If you believe there will be a next regime in which your kind will return to power, you probably should refuse this money, because we're going to take a picture of you standing next to this briefcase full of 20s. And then we're going to leave, and you're going to have the briefcase. And by the way, if you want an extra bonus, what you're going to have to do is write really a full and frank confession of your time in the office. So you're going to have to basically just confess your sins. And trust me, we know what your sins were. And if that's adequate, we're talking 120%, 150%. This is good money. So, you might want to consider, given the fact that the only reason you had this job is that you're a fucking power whore. And now who's in power has changed. So why not
cash out? Yeah.
Why not be flexible? And so that's a way of doing regime change, where you acknowledge that America's ruling aristocracy is its aristocracy. It's the smartest and best people, in the country. These are not people who have had fist fights. These are people who know what fork to use. Do you go from the inside out on the forks or the outside in? You rednecks probably don't even know. And these guys do. And so, the thing is, to just execute these people like the way, Stalin executed the Polish nobility is completely wrong. They need to learn to serve the new regime. And in order to do that, it's essentially the thing about regime change is it's like lions. About lions, right? Mm-hmm. The whole structure of lion, you have the male lion, and the female lions, and they love him and they bear his children. But one day, the old lion, he gets a little old, he's a little slow, and, an asshole or two just kind of wandering around through the bush, who got kicked out by their moms. They're a little small, they're a little young, but they're like, yeah, I could take this old motherfucker. And they take him, and they kill him. And what do they do next?
They kill all of his cubs, yeah.
They kill all of his cubs. And how do the women react to this? How do the ladies of the Pride react?
They mate with him immediately.
They mate with him immediately. They by the murder of their children and the appearance of this new Chad lion, they become desperately horny. And the agony of seeing their cubs killed is becomes this exquisite erotic attraction. I can only compare it to women with serial killers, but even worse, right? And this is what
Coco Chanel did the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. Right. and so this is a mode of female sexuality that we see fortunately only the faintest echoes of in the human female. But we can understand it. The lion is kin to us. And so this is what, when you have a true regime change, this is what happens. And one of the things that really shocked, the Americans when they just totally fucking obliterated just killing as many civilians as they could, just walk the fuck all over Nazi Germany and Shinto Japan. And, they conquer these empires, and they're totally prepared. And they know, of course, that these are some of the most propagandized, fanatical people in history. They make like the Hitler Youth in 1945, the going out to like fight the Soviet tanks with bazookas or whatever at the age of 15. The fanaticism of these kids is like, take like the fanaticism of like just like transgender mob in your like average high school and like multiply it by like 1.5. Right? I mean, that's how fanatical these little Nazis were, right? And it's crazy, right? And so, the general assumption of sorry to inflict that on you. The general assumption of the occupying authorities is, being basically people who had been in fistfights from the old world, having more than a touch of the little Nazi about them themselves, quite frankly. They were just like, we need to just like suppress these motherfuckers with the sword. You look at the occupation, like official orders, just like we've got to limit them to 800 calories a day. We cannot fraternize with these disgusting animals. Whereas MacArthur in Japan is kind of an old Asia hand, and he doesn't do any of this, like, we're going to mistreat the Japanese. And so what's interesting is that both sides get the same result. So, the Germans are, like, very badly mistreated in 45 and 46, and they become as docile as lambs. There's no terrorist activity. There's no werewolf IEDs like, blowing up American Jeeps. No, they cringe and they curtsy and they become the Germans we love and know and love now. They're not even anatomically correct, I think. There's just like a layer of skin there. And so, this works perfectly. And it also works perfectly in Japan where, MacArthur is basically like, we're going to let you keep your emperor. We're going to let many things still be Japanese about Japan. There's a lot of old buildings still there, and, they're very Japanese in many ways. And still, even after 1945, and again, without any draconian coercion, these fanaticized Japanese people, who again, Twitter doesn't really have anything on them, right? And these fanatical, Tumblr doesn't even have anything on them, right? And these fanatical, motherfuckers, like, again, you conquer them, and they're just like, yes sir, misaki tiki, and it's just like people are just like, what? Because that doesn't fit their theory of kind of how domination works. They're basically like, and the reality is that the reason why, as I like to say, kind of World War II is really the ultimate colonialism. And it was like super colonialism. It's like we're such colonialists that we're going to colonize fucking Germany, right? I mean, forget the Philippines, forget Cuba. No, we're going to colonize Germany, right?
Yeah, you call it the last revolt
and they
of
did this, and it worked,
right?
and it was
Still
amazing. It worked
day.
better than to this day. It worked better than colonizing the Philippines, right? These people are just like completely these like bastardized Americans who speak this strange dialect of American, sometimes until they go to college, and they think that they're Germans. They have nothing in common with Germans.
You familiar with the
except
Munich
they're
massacre?
German. The Munich massacre, the Olympic massacre.
Right. So that's happening. And, when that's happening, they were like, well, someone needs to bring a high power rifle and we can deal with this. They're like, there isn't one in this whole fucking country.
Yeah, right. Exactly. They're like, the Treaty of Versailles prohibits us from having high powered rifles.
Yeah, they didn't have one in the whole goddamn country.
Yeah, and after that, they learned to like get a little Nazi, and now they have, of course, they have these special forces units, and because a modern country has to have these, and they have a huge problem with these units because they keep going Nazi, right?
Yeah.
So apparently the eternal German is still with us, but the point that it proves. The point that it really, that this experience really proves is the very important point that force and violence are not synonyms, but they're opposites. So basically, sort of the more strongly you act the less violence and conflict you can expect. And so if you act very weakly, there's this great line from that was from World War II, actually, that was from a French officer, a Vichy French officer in North Africa. And the diplomatic position of these Vichy French motherfuckers was very strange and interesting, and they wore these funny hats, the funny hats, the kipis, and they were, sort of half in the modern world and half in the world of Boyz and the Legion of Honor, like repelling camel charges by dervishes, right? And so, America is like, okay, well, the way into the soft underbelly of Europe is to just invade North Africa. We can just invade places because we're America, whereas when Hitler does it, he's trying to take over the world, which is definitely not what we were trying to do, right? We're trying to free the world. And so we're like, okay, we're going to invade North Africa, which is just utterly whack. And what's our relationship with the French soldiers, all of whom basically fought on our side in World War I, in North Africa to us. And so they go to this French general, right? And they're like, what will you do if we land? And he's like, well, that really depends on what you land with. Because if you land with a company, I'll slaughter you. If you land with a brigade, I'll fight you. If you land with division, I'll surrender to you. And if you land with an army, I'll join you. Right? and that's exactly the attitude of these people who swallowed anything their conscience had to offer and basically joined the satanic regime. They basically joined it because it's what's in power. And obviously, if you look at this stuff, this critical race theory or whatever, it's like the way a lot of German nationalists who supported, and like aristocratic German nationalists who supported the Nazis in the mid to late 30s are like, they're sort of like, well, this like peasant shit about the Jews is like, come on, it's embarrassing. It's definitely embarrassing. But this isn't really going to happen. We don't really believe this stuff. It's like something Hitler is saying just to get votes, and so, they sort of, they excuse this, genuinely, cancerous, anti-Semitism in their midst. As I'm sure everyone in this listening to this podcast, of course, like me, deplores anti-Semitism, and deeply, and. So, what was that, sir? I'm going to have to ask you to cool it with the anti-Semitic remarks. But
this is too many levels of irony for me to follow. Yeah.
What is that? It's irony. I don't believe in this gay thing.
There were
irony.
like Jewish philosophers and stuff with the whole Nazi. You got to imagine,
sure,
with those guys.
Many Jews supported the Third Reich. I mean, they turned out to be mistaken, but it was. Let's just say it was a complicated situation. A lot of things going on. But when you get back to the modern world, what that tells you is it's the same principle as the principle of the French general. It's actually, you think that the more strongly you come, the more strongly you will be opposed. Actually, the more weakly you come, the more strongly you will be opposed. Whereas if you come strongly enough and Humpty Dumpty starts to fall off the wall, Humpty Dumpty is just going to be screaming all the way down, and it is a long way down.
And to be fair, the Germans also thought this twice in the 20th century, and it didn't work out for them either time. Like that was their entire,
that's an interesting conversation. The thing is, I mean, this is obviously a mainstream, podcast, so I don't know how far we want to go here, but the thing is that when you look at, I'll just say it. When you look at the things that Hitler and the Nazis, well, Hitler being dead, of course, if you look at the two main charges against the Nazis in Nuremberg, they were the charge that the Nazis committed insane human rights abuses, and they were the charge that the Nazis were engaged in a conspiracy to take over the world. For some reason, everyone who sort of smells something off about this war basically decides that they're going to debunk the first thing and leave the second one. Well, maybe they'll debunk the second one as well. The problem is the first thing is completely true. Like, the Holocaust is one of the best understood. Our knowledge about it is just insane compared to anything else that happened in history. Yet the whole idea of the Nazi plot to take over the world is completely spurious. And all mainstream historians know it's completely spurious. Like, all mainstream historians know that Hitler's dream was an alliance with England. That was his dream, in the West. His dream in the East was to push the Russian barbarians back behind the Urals and, enslave the Slavs. Their name means Slav, let's face it. And do all that other shit. He sets all of this out in Mein Kampf. And the thing is, his actions during the war reflect, the obvious, conclusion that he actually believes everything he's saying. And because he believes everything he's saying, he lets the English go in Dunkirk. He doesn't actually, he's trying to establish a boundary with the Soviet Union rather than trying to smash them. He never makes an alliance with Japan so that Japan attacks the Soviet Union at the same time as he does, right? He doesn't even really try to get that done. And so why is he doing that? He's doing that because he has his vision of the end game it's like the Texit thing. It's like, Deutschsit. He's like, basically, we're not going to be part of the international community, which is already kind of a thing. Instead of being part of the international community, we'll be like one pole in a multipolar or Westphalian order, which is not a thing.
He
right?
wants to come to terms. He was both in World War I and World War II. Germany wants to come to terms with the British Empire,
with the West, right?
And Britain decided that they would rather, quite literally, lose the entire empire and destroy their country twice than to accept that. So that's the real story.
And Hitler just couldn't. Hitler told them many times that was the choice they were making, and just couldn't understand why they would make that choice. And that failure of understanding is what cost them the war. You guys are Southerners, so the same thing happens in the Civil War. Basically, the South is like, we're going to show the North, which is this nation of dirt grubbing farmers, that we the natural aristocrats of the world, despite our utter lack of any kind of industry or anything, and our insane decision to embargo our only major export in order to convince the English to support us. Same exact kind of mistake, right? And it totally fails and backfires. They should have been selling all the cotton they could to basically buy fucking guns. They don't do that. And then in the first battle of the war, which arguably should have been the last battle of the war, the Battle of Bull Run, basically the Yankees tried to invade. The Confederates, heroically throw them back across the river and then are like, see, we taught those Yankees a lesson. Now let's make peace and they'll admit that we're a separate country. And of course,
you made this argument before.
That is never going to fucking happen. That is never going to fucking happen. Well, militarily, you basically, and you read the sources, right? Like, I was just reading, like, Alexander Porter or whoever, and basically they're like, if you just keep marching to Washington, you take Washington, and there's just nothing in front of you.
That's not true. There was another division that was in between that could have been brought there, and two, like I've heard this argument before. I don't like it because it kind of makes the assumption that the Confederate Army in 1861 that has just everybody, pretty much all the soldiers are fighting their first war. The officers have more experience. You have this disorganized mess after they just won a battle. They're gonna have to go across the Potomac, invade Washington D.C. There are still units that would be available for the defense of DC. I don't think that was a bad decision. I think that actually probably if they had tried to cross the Potomac, it would have been a disaster. And at which point, where are you going to go?
That could be, but
sorry, I'm from Virginia. I'm autistic about this.
Yeah. If you're, I yield to your autism on this subject. Because I'm not aware of the damn Yankee distribution of forces, around the Battle of Bull Run. But
the order of battle.
but the order of battle, right. I haven't studied the order of battle, But the point is that that wasn't, I believe, the reason that decision was made. That mindset of we're defending ourselves and we're going to throw back these invaders is very different from the mindset of we're going to take Boston. Right. Yeah. And, and of course, the stereotype, the conspiracy theory of the South that is held widely in the North at this time is called the slave power conspiracy. There's a great book by, I believe, David Davis on the subject. And the slave power conspiracy literally is like, wow, look at this, conspiratorial Dred Scott thing. They're going to impose slavery on the whole nation. And they weren't. And by the way, most anti-slavery people in the North at the time weren't thinking they're going to impose slavery on the whole nation. This is going to oppress black people even more. Oh no, they were thinking, well, they're going to impose slavery on the whole nation, and that's going to basically allow slave lords to bring Negroes into our neighborhoods. And those Negroes are going to systematically undercut us by working for less than free white labor. That's what most people who supported, basically, who were anti-slavery men believed. They were actually against slavery because they were racist.
Yeah, they wanted to send them back to Africa.
Yeah, they wanted to send it back to Africa, literally. I mean, this is Abraham Lincoln and the American Colonization Society. This is also why, the state of Oregon, in its constitution, I think they may have amended this. They've certainly haven't, I think, enforced it for a while.
I don't know.
Actually bans African Americans. Yeah, the demographics. It's pretty strong, right? And so, but there are so many places that have the demographics of a Klan rally. I mean, have you, Burning Man, for example? I think actually Burning Man is considerably whiter than the Klan at this point. If there is even such a thing as a Klan.
I've never stopped by Burning Man. I wouldn't know.
If you look at pictures, it's definitely like, yep. This is definitely apartheid era South Africa, and there might be like a colored person of color somewhere around there. Speaking actually, I wanted to digress into a subject, which is, I said person of color, and I thought of BIPOCs, and here is the question, and I wish like one of these like rationalist prediction sites would take this up, because I'd love to see the answer to this. Those like Mentaculous or Metaculous. I always confuse it with like the like crazy guy from the Coen Brothers, A Serious Man film. I think it's Metaculous, and the Coen Brothers thing is Mentaculous. But my question is, within a few years, by say 2025 or so, will the word BIPOC have become a racial slur?
Ooh.
This is a very definitive question in critical race theory, right? And the test of a theory is can it predict the future, right? So, how will people be using that word in the future? Will they be saying, I don't want to live in this neighborhood because there's too many BIPOCs around? For example, so
this is one of those ways that you're ahead of the game by being a West Coast guy. The West Coast is always a few years ahead of everyone else in this stuff.
Right. No, it's very true. But all right, yeah. Before the BIPOCs, where were we? We were on. You don't
win the war unless you have plans to march to Quebec, or if you're Nazi Germany, you're in between two people that are playing for keeps. You need to plan big. Big plan wins over little plan. Right.
The big plan wins over the little plan, and to win with the big plan, you basically have to have, are there situations where you could make Texit work? Maybe, probably not. Like, imagine Texit, like, all they have to do is not deal, like, the Fed can cut off the Texas banks, right?
Yeah. This is like a treasury bill against, like, a crypto. The crypto can triple overnight. You know what I mean? If you're promising to go all the way, then the potential gains are unlimited.
Yeah, exactly. And so actually, it's the promise of going all the way that actually creates a lot more energy in a somewhat more subtle sense, but in a kind of more sustainable sense than the energy of, oh my God, they're teaching our kids to be transgender and castrate themselves. I mean, that does create a lot of anger, but the thing is that anger sort of, it wears off into learned helplessness, and you just learn that, it's like getting old. You learn that certain parts of your body are just permanently sore, and in this case, you're actually old and comatose, and you're like, wow, yeah, my butt hurts all the time, right? And you just grow to accept these things. Whereas if you're offered the prospect of actually, like, there's this great, it's sort of the ultimate in populism. I may even have talked about it last time I was on your show, which is this great Slobodan Milosevic line where he goes to Kosovo, where, this historically white province where the Serbian, where the Albanians have come to vastly outnumber the Serbs due to their increased progenitiveness or something like that. And the Serbs, of course, have been mistreated by the communist government. but they're still kind of the hereditary, ruling class because, they have average IQs of 95, which is like they have 15 points on an Albanian, right? So Milosevic comes to them, I don't think I'm going to be canceled for anti-Albanian, comments, the probably
memory TV meme in this
memory TV meme, right? You're like, if God help me if I say it, an Albanian, So Milosevic comes down there as this whole thing is falling apart, and he goes to talk to the Serbs, and he has this great line where he's like, "No one will dare to beat you anymore." And, the excitement of basically, you're not like, oh, we're going to stop the teaching of anti-Serbian rhetoric, in the Kosovo schools. Or like, oh, I'm complaining that when I go to school, my child's textbooks are teaching me that, Albanians are dogs and worms. And, Jesus, sucked the dick of the devil,
the Trump order,
like, I have to.
The Trump order literally said made kids feel bad.
Yeah, and it's like my kids are being made to feel bad. Can you stop my kids from being made to feel bad by having maybe a little more pro-Serbian rhetoric? You might acknowledge, for example, that maybe, some Serbs are certainly the sons of dogs, but not all Serbs, right? Some are descended from a sort of primitive human.
Hitler said the Swiss were Germans, but retarded Germans.
Yeah, well, that's what they sound like. Sorry for any Swiss listeners. That was just too easy. You actually do sound retarded, but
great school.
But that it's all right. But have you heard Swiss German? Oh my God,
no.
I'm going to be so canceled for this. But in any case, you have to have, if you're going to say you want to change in this regime, it's actually much easier to change the whole thing than to try to change these little parts. And if you want to change the whole thing, you have to be wearing your big boy pants. And you have to live up to the responsibility of that. And, in part, I'm not saying Hitler is a nice guy. I'm saying the reason he doesn't conquer England and Russia is that he doesn't really even know what he would do with them. Right? It's a failure of vision. It's a failure of imagination. The reason, Hitler takes possession of all these Jews with just these amazing talents, all he can think of to do is to gas them. It's ridiculous. It's retarded. And so when you, in some ways, like the Hitlers and the Stalins of the mid-century are sort of like, as compared to the new emperors that we need, it's like comparing Marius and Sylla to Caesar and Augustus, where, they sort of didn't really know what they were doing. They thought they were coming to restore sort of an imagined order that had vanished. And as a result, they took a lot of half measures. And as a result of taking a lot of half measures, their half measures were extremely violent. And,
they're plugging holes in a sinking ship.
They're plugging holes in the sinking ship, and they're plugging them with the heads of their enemies. That's a slightly mixed metaphor, but you get the picture, right? And that's sort of what everyone expected. That became the stereotype of the guy who wants to be dictator for life. And, Caesar and Augustus come along and they just shatter the stereotype, not by thinking smaller than Marius and Sylla, but by thinking bigger. And so they're basically like, there's this great anecdote that I always retell that it should be, just memorized by anyone who is a student of regime change, or is interested in regime change, which is the only solution to any of our problems, which is Caesar, who's just this amazing guy. And, he wins his last battle against the forces of the dying republic. It's in North Africa at Utica, I think, which is also a town in New York. And he beats the forces of Cato. And, Cato is like, everybody respects Cato. Everybody knows, like, Cato is completely sincere. Like, a lot of these, like, Republican fucks are completely just degenerate, unprincipled, or aristocrats. Everyone knows Cato is for real. And to convince, if everyone didn't know Cato was for real, they know Cato was for real by the way he dies. Because the way Cato dies is like full Japanese. Like he's literally like, has a slave, like, give him a sword and like slits his own belly with a sword. Incredibly painful shit, super Roman, super samurai, epic stuff, right? But Caesar wins the battle. And when he wins the battle, he captures Cato's tent. And in Cato's tent, there's a big chest full of letters from all of Cato's friends back in Rome. Now, the thing is, the way these, sort of the accepted rules of these civil wars, from the ages of Marius and Sylla, involved what was called proscription. And proscription, which is something, something everybody should understand because we may see some versions of it in the future, was a very violent affair. You basically said, okay, I'm going to take all the supporters of my enemies and I'm going to take their money and I'm going to kill them and I'm going to give their money to my friends. And it's sort of a very practical thing to do. So you imagine Trump taking office and he orders George Soros executed and he distributes Soros's fortune to Ivanka's friends, right? And that would be a very Roman thing to do. And so
Caesar got out of town because
Caesar had to get out of town because he was too close to Marius, right? Mm-hmm. And he was really he was very close to being on this list. And so he wasn't rich at the time, but there were a number of goals of proscription, and one of them is wars by killing your enemies, right? So when Caesar's guys basically see this chest full of letters, they get a huge hard on because, of course, one thing that you do in this situation is you'd pretend to be friends with both sides. Right. Mm-hmm. So, you see a chest full of letters and you're like, okay, wow, I guess this is when we get to find out who really wanted to bet on us. Right. And they're like, oh, man, this is so cool. Right. They're just cackling with glee. And they're like, okay, Caesar, what do we do with this? Do we start going through it A to Z or Z to A? And Caesar's like, okay, here's what you're going to do with the chest. You're going to put it on a bunch of logs. You're going to pour a ton of extra virgin olive oil all over it, and you're going to set it on fire. And Caesar's guys are like, what? What are those? You smoking some kind of North African opium here? And Caesar's like, guys, you don't get it. We just won here. We won everything. We have no enemies. These people aren't our enemies. We own them. They're ours now. And that, that approach where you're basically saying, as a Confederate in 1861, you would have said, well, I don't have any idea how Massachusetts should be governed. They should, if they don't want slavery or they hate black people or whatever, fine. They can be racist. They can be abolitionists. We don't, why would we want to impose slavery on Massachusetts, right? And
this is
maybe,
where the desire for vengeance becomes a great tax on your power.
Yeah. I mean, and you're thinking in the wrong way. Whereas if you're thinking, basically Massachusetts is this hive of just insane ideologies that are, free love, polygamy. Oh, that's more a Mormon thing. But all this just crazy weird shit is coming out of Massachusetts. It's cancer. This cancer is going to infect poor Massachusetts itself. They're basically and we have to help them. Actually, the authorities of Massachusetts do not have a right to rule Massachusetts. We do. We will take these Brahmins and turn them into proper aristocrats. We will teach them to ride. We will teach them to shoot. And we may even be able to teach them to tell the truth. And and we're going to take charge of these benighted people and govern them as they deserve to be governed. Because we're serving God here, like all regimes, and God does not want these people to suffer under their own shit livery. And if you basically take that attitude toward having a right to rule, and you say it's not just that we have a right to rule ourselves, we also have a right to rule our enemies, and we will rule them better than they rule themselves. Then it's just like quienes más macho, right? It's like you're playing for the same stakes that they're playing for because they certainly believe they have a right to rule you. And it's a completely different mindset. And it's a mindset where when your mindset is not, I'm going to rule them, but I'm going to punish them or I'm going to hurt them or I'm going to do, that's actually a much more violent mindset. Whereas when you're like, my God, even if let's say you're Hitler, you believe in the, international Jewish conspiracy, even if you'd been like, we're going to free England from the Jews, right? You would have had better results from that theory than from the theory you actually operated on, right? And we're going to free Russia from the Jews, fine, whatever, right? irrespective of the truth of the international Jewish conspiracy, that conspiracy theory would have worked much better than the one you were actually operating on.
If he held it to himself long enough to get a nuke and strap it on one of Braun's rockets, he might could have scared London.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think he would have just, that was one thing about, one of the things that we learned so many lessons about psychological warfare from this war.
That's true.
Including the one that I just mentioned of force is everything. And, if you have force, you don't need violence. The other thing that was learned is all of this strategic bombing came from the theories of this Italian fascist general Giulio Duhet before the war, who's basically looks at the growing air power and it's just been we won't even really have wars anymore. Even, countries will just intimidate each other with city bombing because city bombing will work so incredibly well with the latest developments. And, people are projecting what airplanes can do the way people project, what AI can do now. And they're just you'll just be able to just wipe out whole cities in storms of fire, which turned out to be true. However, it also turned out to be a completely ineffective military mechanism because basically the more you abused a civilian population, the more some Winston Churchill guy would come out and be I have only blood, sweat, and tears to give you. And on both sides, now the Germans got bombed a lot harder, than the English. On both sides, strategic bombing, which was intended as basically a means of economic warfare, of economic and political warfare, that would defeat the enemy by basically making them, as sort of rational democratic voters or whatever, agitate for peace because, it was all sort of Vietnam era thinking almost. It was proto game theory. It's we're going to bomb them until they realize that they would rather lose the war than be bombed.
Yeah,
right?
They'll vote out the Fuhrer after it.
They'll vote out the Fuhrer or they'll vote out Churchill, right? And that was absolutely the thinking. Vote out Churchill was maybe a little more realistic than vote out the Fuhrer, but yeah, absolutely they were basically bombing. They were killing somewhere around 1 million civilians. In all theaters of the war were basically being killed for this theory, which was just totally fucking wrong. We haven't really had that many people killed for a theory, until gain of function research. And
these cities have incredible resilience. You might see San Francisco.
The cities burned. The cities burned, and the people were killed, and they just got more fanatical. They were wow, the Jews are burning us from the sky. We must resist. And do we have any Jews we can burn? And
San Francisco just reelected Chesa Bowden. Right?
Really? Did the recall fail?
I'm joking here. But I'm just saying there's an appetite for destruction here.
No, they'll promote him to mayor, right? There's absolutely when you're dealing with human psychology, when you make people sacrifice for the collective by being bombed or being stabbed and raped in San Francisco, they're basically I was, they go home and they were I was raped today, but at least I was raped for a good cause. And, my experience of being raped has helped me understand in a much more principled way what the underprivileged go through every day.
He's got a big vision.
I really feel close to them, and the and that's that's human psychology. Actually, the more you abuse people, the more their dog-like loyalty comes out. Right? It's completely contrary to the Whig theory of history. Actually, people rebel because the government treats them too well and sucks up to them too much. And so, and this is a lesson that you see consistently. And so, essentially, when you feel as American conservatives, well, they haven't sort of worked hard enough in some ways to feel, but if they don't actually have the right to rule, they need to very speedily develop it. And once they develop it, they need to feel it. And once they feel it, it's simply a matter of asking a regime that doesn't believe in itself at all anyway to surrender. And there's a half a chance that if this regime had anyone to surrender to, they would just surrender. Because their level of self-confidence really in many ways is not great. And the level of this just deranged race rhetoric is it's really hard to believe. Okay, it's newly fashionable among a certain crowd. It's going to be hard for that weird shit to stay fashionable, really hard. like Ibrahim X Kendi in 2028. Like, how do you keep that going? You know, and so you're going to have a situation, or you already have a situation where, like, the only reason people are fanatical about supporting the regime today is that they fear and loathe their enemies. They, like, everything is about fear and loathing of Trump and his peasant army. And the more you can decrease that stimulus, the better, because as you decrease that stimulus, you're actually sapping the emotional energy of the regime. I mean, already just by having Trump lose the election, I mean, just incredible drops in MSNBC numbers have you know, like, you're just like, if you said, okay, dear right-wing America, here's this measure that is going to, like, drop the, like, revenues of the main enemy, you know, newscast by, like, 65%. And do you want to use that weapon? And that weapon is basically losing the presidential election. And so you're basically seeing the opposite of the Trump bump. You're seeing the Trump slump. And, you know, basically all of these, like, you know, every journalist knows this. And every journalist in the world, when Trump, you know, lost the election, every journalist in the world, you know, was like, fuck. You know, I really wanted this to happen. As a principled person, I'm really glad the Trump Reich is over. On the other hand, fuck. And because they just know that, like, the pool of clicks. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Sorry, the Department of Labor announced today that journalism numbers are disappearing. Journalism jobs are disappearing faster than coal miners.
Yeah, these are rookie numbers, but you know we can do much better, and you know that's like saying like the Stasi is laying off people. I'm like, the Stasi is laying off people. I'm like, no. The question is, should there be a Stasi? And the answer is no. God has cursed the Stasi, and there should not be a Stasi, and the Stasi is bad. And you know, and once you stick to that position is so much more alpha. And you know, if there's anything that can wake up this, like, degenerate, I just want to grill, you know, burger American who's being, you know, penetrated really painfully, as we described earlier. And, you know, how can we make him up and sort of feel the full humiliation of his experience? And the thing that can wake him up is hope. And if you actually basically show him that there's a world in which nobody's doing the raping, right? You know, then you might be able to inspire him. But you inspire him a lot less with, you know, your, like, constant, you know, scammy TV show offers of hemorrhoid cream, which is basically what the conservatism has devolved into. Make sense?
Yeah. Okay, so have you been checking out Ron DeSantis?
Yeah. I mean, you mean checking out in like a gay sense? No, I've not been checking out.
No, in terms of like, do you think he wants to be the dictator of America? I mean, you see little bits of stuff where it seems like one thing, he's young. Basically, it would take a shitload of ambition to want to be the guy, and the other thing is he doesn't. He just kind of makes moves. He doesn't make these huge announcements like Trump. He just kind of takes the money and just moves on.
Yeah, I don't know, like, the seriousness of, you know, obviously he's a very, very intelligent, you know, person, although he's of Italian heritage, I believe.
Yeah.
You know, as a critical race, obviously that tells us something, right? But you know, I mean, you can go in a lot of different directions. We'd have to know, like, Italy is it's a geographical expression, as Metternich. It's a huge place, and I think we'd have to know more about his background to really use our critical race theory. In any case, you know, I do see, you know, a couple of things that would make me doubt that. I see things, you know, whenever someone is sort of doing things that are sort of clearly for the camera in some sense, the problem is that someone like, you know, Chris Rufo, I mean, he's a young person, you know, like, he's obviously very excited by what he's doing. I don't think that he's conscious of his, you know, griftness at all. And whereas someone who's a professional politician, when he does something that's fake, kind of knows it. And someone who's basically sort of theory of ruling is that he's going to sort of convey the reality of power to the world and kind of break the illusion and kind of lead his people out of the Truman Show, which is really what you have to do as an American dictator. Doesn't make these kinds of phony moves in a way, and so there is a phoniness. Not to get all J.D. Salinger on you. There is kind of a phoniness that I sense from a long distance there, but it's a very faint odor. And the thing that I would say is that one of the tendencies that I have is I tend to blame people for not inventing things, which is always really bad. I mean, and I think that my task, and the task of others of this new wave of intellectuals and kind of the new critical race theory and all those perspectives, have to offer is basically we can't blame someone like Ron DeSantis for not sort of substituting the fake thing with the real thing, because he doesn't really have any idea of what the real thing would be, he's obviously a very smart person. He graduated from first in his class from Yale or something like that. He's been trained in guerrilla warfare. Whatever. But it's the job of the intellectual. Plato. It's like Plato's mistake in going to Syracuse. It was never Plato's job to go to Syracuse and help Dion be the right kind of tyrant. Plato should have just stayed in Syracuse and written his books. And if somebody wants to create the republic, they want to create the republic. And if they don't, they don't. And so your task is basically, as an intellectual, my task as an intellectual is to basically say, if somebody wants to create a new world and has the cojones to do it, then the understanding of how they do that should be out there. It should be well understood. There should be kind of an intellectual button they can push. Someone like Ron DeSantis, who has to go around all day shaking hands and raising money, because that's really what a politician does. I mean, if you think of him as being based, that would be because his staff is based, right? Yes. And you're starting to see more people with basically based staffs. You definitely can go to DC. I can go to DC and meet based staffers, right? And the
great revolutionary is not some guy that reads evil at night. It is a corny dude that with nice teeth.
Yeah, a base staffer, right? Right. And so that's not really a thing. It's starting to be a thing. And so it's nice to have sort of based staffers. And it's just like you have to understand, the understanding, the people and the nation can't walk the path until they understand the path that they're going to walk. This is a purely intellectual job. It's actually a huge intellectual project. It's really hard. It can absorb a lot of people who basically otherwise might be, the wrong kind of critical race theorist. Because that's, of course, the thing about, old and new critical race theorists. Like the new kinds of critical race theorists really think about solutions. And when I mean permanent solutions, right? And how are we going to solve these race problems? And there's a lot of answers to these questions. And I think I think it's very doable.
I did not like this answer coming into this. However, I think you've changed my mind basically because my imagining of taking power is basically you're just grabbing budgets, you hand money to some guy, you say, give me a signed resignation, I'm gonna keep it in my safe, and you just add up these guys. However, you're saying you need a vision of what power looks like. Okay, immediately I go to this example. I really like it much of Huey Long. Like one of the first things Huey Long did is puts out this book that says My First 30 Days in the White House, and he basically lays out this thing where he's the dictator of America. He says, this is what I'm going to do. This is how me running this country alone.
Right. Yes, and that's exactly that. That's and it's more than like. Except that, you need a vision for your first 30 days in the White House, but it's even more compelling if you have a vision for your first 30 years in the White House.
Right.
And you're like, basically like, okay, Huey Long, here, if you elect me president, in 1936, here's what America in 1966 is going to look like, and it's like those pictures you see on Twitter of like the futuristic city and whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so basically you're painting with this huge brush, and these little quibblers basically just don't have anything nearly as sexy to oppose you with. And if you have both the first 30 years and the first 30 days, they're just like, damn, motherfucker! Like they like you've mogged them, right? And that's sort of the sense in which basically Caesar, in many ways, seizes power. He's basically he's like, look, you saw what I just did to the Gauls. Like, I would take the same energy and ability and use it to make Rome great again.
He said, you're like, I have the dignity to do this, and you've taken it away from me. Like, this was mine, to begin with.
Right. Well, that was his specific beef with the, Republican degenerate aristocrats, right? He's like, but the thing is, it's like something Napoleon once said, where he's like, every government is safe where the most competent people are in power. Like, you can't really look at Washington and you're like, okay, Washington is safe, right? Because there are, ways of doing things that are outside Washington's ken that are 1,000 times more efficient. Like we saw that, for example, with Obama's frickin' Obamacare website, where he's like, he couldn't even get a sign-up website to work. And finally they were like, help. The DC IT business is not small. It's not like there's nobody who makes money programming computers in DC. But they were like, help, a website. It is beyond us. We need help. And they call in help, and a bunch of Silicon Valley people, who are all libs, of course, but know how to work in the Silicon Valley way, which is basically a monarchical, militaristic way of working, and they just, of course, get it done in like 3 days or whatever, right? And maybe it's 3 weeks.
You had a great line where you said, I used to say, would you buy an Irish car, right? And people are like,
right.
You said, would you buy a car made by, DC? Of course, that's ridiculous.
Right. If the Department of Transportation decided they were going to create the electric car, of course, it's ridiculous. And, there's an interesting analog to this in Roman history. So, not Caesar, but another sort of Caesar-like character is Pompey. Yeah. And Pompey was known as Pompey the Great. And the reason that Pompey was known as Pompey the Great is that Rome had this pirate problem. Kind of like Mexico with like drug lords, where basically, there's like huge pirate empires, generations of pirates, and these assholes, these pirates are like such a serious problem that they're really threatening Rome's like food supply, because they basically like get all their food from like Egypt or some such shit, right? Yeah. And Egypt had a lot more food and a lot fewer people, I guess, in those days, and so the Senate is like forced to come to terms with this problem, and of course these drug lords. These pirates are all like, in bed with various provincial officials, and they're connected to the political system, and it's all this huge corrupt mess. And the official story is like, oh my God, we can't do anything about these pirates. Exactly like Mexico with the drug lords. So finally, the Senate, for whatever reason, I forget the actual politics, is like, fuck this, we've had enough of this. And they appoint this guy, Pompey, who's like this kid in his 20s, like classic startup bro, right? And they take this bro Pompey, and they're like, okay, Pompey, we're going to appoint you the CEO of the Mediterranean. And you can basically have all the money and all the resources you want, and your job is to unfuck the Mediterranean. And Pompey is like, sure, no problem, I'll unfuck the Mediterranean. And without any IT at all, without any computers, telephones, guns, anything like that, he clears the whole fucking ocean of pirates in 3 motherfucking months. Right? And, Romans look at this and they're like, wow, there are 2 ways of doing things. Like the Republican way, which fucking sucks, and the military way, which just like completely fucking works. Right? And so, when you're like basically like, Caesar is going to take control of Rome and rule, create a new kind of military empire which governs in the military way and not in the old, senatorial way, that starts looking pretty good. And, it's sort of, when you have that kind of, if you sort of compare that basis for this is the basis on which I'm going to go to the people and ask them for the, their support versus my complaint that my butt hurts is the basis on which I'm going to ask them for. Of course, your butt hurts. You're getting pounded, right? And so basically, instead of the pitch is no, now you are the one who are going to do the pounding. It's a totally different pitch. It's a much more attractive pitch. It's also a pitch that's much harder to understand, and you have to convey, basically a totally different, a totally different impression. And so in a way, when I look at what someone like Chris Rufo is doing, the reason I'm, obviously he's a great guy. Obviously, if he just wanted to be a shill, he would have studied critical race theory instead of fighting it, right? And he could be doing lectures next to Tim Wise, right? This is a talented man.
Yeah. He
could be working for the enemy, and he's not, and we have to respect that. And he's getting shit done, and we also have to respect that. And he's working hella hard. He's doing, the amazing thing about Rufo is that he's like a one-stop vertically integrated shop. Like, he goes all the way from, like, research to legislation. This is Renaissance man stuff, right? But in the end, like, he's basically working for the enemy. And he's basically making my job as someone whose job it is to basically lead people out of the Truman Show, because basically, it's like you're watching the Truman Show, and basically my advice is you're in a building, get out of the building, get in the boat, sail it to the edge of the world, bump into the world, go out the door, right? And his advantage is his thinking. You've seen the Truman Show, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And his advice, is very different. His advice is your wife is a psycho. Like, you've got to divorce her and, like, get a new wife, right? And I'm like, it's true. Like, there's something really weird about your relationship, Truman, with your wife, but, like, this is not the problem. The problem is Christoph, right? And the problem is that you actually live in a giant fake dome world, and you're being basically filmed for, like, TV ad bucks. And so, my
favorite,
that's it.
My favorite Pompey story is, he's supposed to be the only goyim that's ever been into the Holy of Holies.
Oh,
Basically,
right.
he was just certain that these Jews it was just full of money, and he was out there getting every bit of gold he could out of them.
Well, looting was, of course, a huge thing for a general at that time and place, right?
Well, money, in both sense, in their time and our time, the money is the power, right? This is why team
even more
rule.
so, even more so than, maybe not more so than, but absolutely true. The money is the power. And when I say I'm against prescription. Okay, I want to be perfectly I don't want to go too far here. I'm definitely against killing the rich, whatever their ideology is. As far as taking all of their money, or maybe just most of it, I think that's in many cases absolutely appropriate. Sorry, go on.
You have these guys like Bill Gates. This is one of our favorite things. So, if you talk to the communists, one of these things they say is like, it's better, like, if you want to have, the best thing to happen is that all small businesses are crushed. And then like one or two titans of industry, take, like, Bezos is good basically, because he just hoovers up all the capital, and then you can kind of like, you can just go get it from one guy. In this case, I don't disagree with that. It's like, okay, well, this Gates guy, whatever he's got, he owns everything. He owns like half the farmland. Well, that's you could part that out. Guys, as a computer guy, I can tell you, like, what all of this ownership and all of this money and whatever, they're just entries in a database. Okay, and you just change the entry. And, I think the right thing to say, first of all, if you're a foundation, an endowment, a university or whatever, obviously, that's all seized. Everything. Yeah, you can't expect it to keep operating. Yeah. But if you're a rich progressive dude, or it may not even be just a progressive dude, presumably there's exceptions for, anyone who really supported, the
change, as I think we're going to call it. But if you supported the change, you may be exempt from this. But for, basically you can assume that any ordinary rich person is a progressive. And so the right way to treat them again is, has to be gentle, because you actually don't want to fuck them in the ass. You want to give them a reach around, right?
How did Julius Caesar? So Julius Caesar took over basically by obsessively propagandizing that he would not do this. He would not do this,
right? And so I think the situations are a little bit different. I think that you have to do it, but you have to do it in a softer way. And so rather than executing George Soros, you say, okay, look, George Soros, you're a rich man. We're not going to humiliate you by making you, a Walmart greeter. Right? I can't really imagine George Soros should live out the rest of his life in dignity and comfort. He should live as a rich person. He should enjoy the amenities of being a rich person. And basically anyone who has fuck you money should continue to have fuck you money. So the thing is, the idea of expropriating all of George Soros's assets is really, it has this sadistic tone that is really wrong. Right, you should always treat officers as officers, and defeated generals should be treated with great mercy. And so, if you basically fix a number which is for your age and your and medical condition, and what is actual FU money for you, so you shouldn't have to work ever again. So for someone as old as George Soros, that might be as much as $5 or $6 million, right? So if you leave him with that amount of money, what does he really have to be butthurt about? I'm like, man, you're a millionaire. It's over. We know this thing is over. It's over. I know it's over. Everybody knows it's over. Just chill out and write memoirs, man. And that vibe. You sound
like Huey Long right now, by the way.
Yeah. That vibe is, but it's more chill than Huey Long. The vibe has to be extremely chill here, right? And and so the sort of the more force you act with, the chiller the vibe can be. And, for the 21st century, you really want a very, very chill vibe for your revolutions. You're not hanging people from the lamppost or anything. And so,
that was Caesar's deal. He treated people with a velvet glove, and the implicit thing was, Caesar Frank, he was so good at that, like many people who are excellent at things, he grew, he should have paid a little more attention to his personal security. But, and then, Octavian, although I think he blamed it on Mark Antony, did a little bit of that shit before he was really Augustus. He was Augustus was just he was a brutal small man. I know obviously he was a brilliant administrator. Blah, blah, we all worship him. Blah blah blah. But on a more on a personal level, he was a small, brutal man compared to Julius Caesar.
Well, yeah. We certainly don't have a great literary corpus from Augustus the way we have one from Julius Caesar, and it's not because Augustus didn't have time to write, right?
I pray all the time that he wrote a book that we don't get called Anti-Cato, which is just supposed to be I love Caesar's.
Caesar, yeah.
Oh, that would be so wonderful.
That would be so wonderful if we dug that up and if we dug that up in some, scroll. It's like Cicero. Cicero is to me the ultimate Roman shitlib. Cicero is the James Lindsay of Rome. He's the shitlib who sees the problems, right? But he's still a lib, and he's totally the James Lindsay of Rome. And
he's totally a guy who understands where he would have been a guy who would have been he would have been a guy who would have been the communist, then the Nazis, and the shit lib, no problem. He just whatever the power is.
Yeah, he was ultimately in it only for himself, and Cicero's ego really shows through. At the same time, I think one of the flaws in the American system is so much of it is kind of LARPed from Cicero. And they admired Cicero, and that may be of what got us to where we are today.
The person we talk about most in this podcast is Caesar, and just basically how disgusting Cicero. Caesar, he also he had this great sense of when he did have power and when he didn't. My favorite examples are the story where he's captured on the pirate ship and he realized
the pirate story is so good.
I'm their you can't do anything to me. I'm your meal ticket, so I can just do whatever I want because if I'm gone, you're toast. The opposite example, which is one people don't think about so much, is when a guy basically fucks his wife, if not fucked her, then she clearly wanted to participate. He's on trial, and they say, look, this guy did this to you, didn't he? Like, what do you say? And he says, I don't know. I don't have any proof of that. They said, well, you divorced your wife. I mean, obviously. He says, I don't know anything. And that moment, he's realizing, like, this guy is a fucking gang leader. I don't have the chips at this moment. So this, like, even though I am just getting absolutely cucked in every sense, this is not the time.
Yeah. No, his I mean, and his mix of military and political instincts were just so remarkable. And then, of course, as his writing is just like, it's like Caesar is like, Caesar in comparison to the writers of his time, and of course later Roman writers mostly became more flowery and unreadable. And Caesar has this incredibly plain prose style, which is actually, comparable to, in some ways, one of the great Americans. Now, I think Mark Twain had a lot to do with this book, but if you read the memoirs of U.S. Grant, they're written in the age of flowery writing of the Victorians, but both the memoirs of Grant and Sherman, and I say that despite them being Yankees, I know this, you can read Admiral Semmes to clean your palate, but they're just these masterpieces of prose. They're just
Caesar
this like beautiful, plain, simple writing.
Masculine writer. It's who, what, when, where, why. Absolutely, that's one that, like, I had committed like half. I had almost committed like half of his diaries to memory. Wow. The Rex Warner translation. And one of the things is, like, I read this and I'm like, this is a guy, like, I understand like what he's saying and like why he makes the decision. I understand when he's like making an appeal, when and if he reads something from like 200 years ago, I'm like, I don't understand. Who are these people? This is like an alien.
Yeah, this is something that I strongly recommend. James Anthony Froude's. You say it the way Bill and Ted pronounce Froude, but it's actually spelled Froude. And he has a wonderful evocation of the period that I just read called Sketch of Caesar. It's about more than Caesar. It's about the whole period. And he really brings these characters to life. And, one of the points he makes is in his introduction is exactly the point that, you just made, which is that, there's just long stretches of history where we know that this history is made of actual human beings, but, all we have is a caricature. And we know that behind this caricature, there were actual human beings who acted like humans, but we just can't see through it. And then, in the case of Caesar, we look at this and we're just like, this guy is completely, like, these people are completely human. We know Caesar, we know Cicero, and they act like human beings, and we can relate to them as peers. Yes. And and that's what someone like Caesar basically has to offer. So I mean, and you compare basically like imagine let's go back to the subject of the podcast. And talk about, critical race theory. Let's suppose that you demanded equal time for, not even for my new critical race theory. It's a new theory. It has, there's a lot of research that still has to be done, in NCRT. But that work is ongoing. But, if you demanded simply, we know everything that needs to be known about Caesar. And if you demanded, kind of equal time for critical race theory and, imperial Roman theory, for example, and you're like, okay, we're going to learn the 21st century definition of virtue, which is basically you have to be a cuck and grease yourself, and we're going to learn another, first century BC definition of virtue, which is the Roman definition of virtue, and we're going to read both Ibram X. Kendi and Caesar. And I believe that if you took a modern high school class and you had them read both Ibram X. Kendi and Caesar, or what's that girl's White Fragility,
Kimberly
and then
Crenshaw, or I know you're talking about the
D'Angelo. She was Italian.
The pop, exactly. Well, there's Italians and we know. Let's not go too deep into this, right?
We'll learn that, and you'll learn all about that in the new CRT.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Those statues were blonde hair,
one of the, a core, obviously, probably about the research, very serious psychological research into stereotype accuracy. I mean, stereotype accuracy is one of the most sort of that and IQ is are two of the most experimentally confirmed sociological results, right? And pattern recognition, right? And so here we have, stereotype accuracy is pattern recognition plus the wisdom of crowds. And one stereotype they have, in Italy, and I learned this from Luigi Barzini's, the Italians from 1960. I don't know if they still know this in Italy, but I suspect they might. Any Italian readers, give a shout out. Obviously, is that there's a joke they tell about Garibaldi. Garibaldi, right? And the joke is that Garibaldi didn't unite Italy.
He divided Africa.
That's right. And he divided Africa. And, if you've ever been to Naples, it's more than just humor. I mean, that's like a lived experience in critical race theory. I mean, and one of the things, by the way, you'll need to become a new critical race theorist is you really need to go there and have the experience. You need to go on site, right? You can't be, if you're researching, say, Kazakhs, for example, you've got to go to Kazakhstan. I mean, there's no question, right?
You got to get the calipers out. You got to do the work.
You've got to get the calipers out, right? You've got to measure the Kazakhstanis.
Safaris.
You've got to live with the Kazakhstanis. If there's, you've got to learn their sexual habits. I mean, for example, the reason Margaret Mead is so, sort of got so defrauded in her Samoan research is that she went to Samoa and reported on the sex life of Samoans without actually having any sex with Samoans, right? So with the new critical race theory, yes, is interracial sex a part of critical race theory? Absolutely.
We did a podcast not too long ago, and of course, when we go places, people like you guys talked to Curtis Yarvin, and one of the things they said, well, that guy is a Angloid legalist, and it made me think an
Angloid legalist.
What's
Angloid legalist? I'm very.
What
first
you're
one, very
describing is like a red coat officer. He's out there on the.
It's the Anglo. It's definitely an apologetically Anglo version of critical race theory. And of course, when we think about the kind of historical antecedents of critical race theory, we think of them as coming, they're really very, very Teutonic. They're very, and then there's this kind of clotted rhetoric, which is very, if we can go full James Lindsay here, it's kind of Hegelian, and I've never really liked Hegel. And
Caesar did this work with the British. This is he was like, well, these guys they wear blue paint and they fuck all day.
Yeah. And that was that. Oh, obviously, that itself was critical race theory, right? But I mean, there's so much that we can do in a positive sense of just expanding people's imaginations, and and the thing of this butthurt stuff is so. It's so constricted and so you can sense the boomer yelling out over his can of Bud Light, maybe even throwing it at the screen, the screen has a crack in it where Tucker Carlson's nose is because he hears the stuff, right? And it's true. It's very true. The butt hurt is real. Your butt actually hurts. It hurts more than you can possibly imagine, but you're half asleep, right? But I can see that temptation to wake people up and feel the butt hurt.
You've talked to people that are very powerful, billionaires and stuff. One of these guys just has to go. We're gonna fucking bring back the Roman Empire, right?
You could never bring back. I mean, the
it's been done.
You can never
times.
It's been done many times.
You can never step in the same river twice. Are you stepping in a river? Yes, you're stepping in a river. It's a completely different river. And I think the field is sort of wide open for kind of, I'm working on this book. Gray Mirror is the title of the book. That's the theme of my Substack, which is graymirror.substack.com. And, if you're okay, being kind of left out of this discourse, you probably shouldn't even go to the site, and you certainly shouldn't subscribe, especially if this kind of stuff is too much for you. Because we don't want anyone at Gray Mirror. We want only cool people. So, but if you can handle the kind of discourse that you've heard here, you should come to my site and subscribe. And but there's so many visions of such an amazing future you can offer if you basically stop limiting yourself by the sort of convention of what's politically possible. Actually, nothing interesting is politically possible, and so you actually have this convention of what's politically possible. None of these things are possible anyway. Like UBI is not even really possible, right? And so when you basically throw these things aside, and instead of designing ways to fix this horrible blob of Washington that we have, you design ideas for the next regime, or as I call it, when you're basically, when you work on public policy today, you get a degree in public policy, and it's a degree in, policy is the art of the possible. It's like what's possible. The nudge, right? And you're like, what will people, vote for? And I'm just like, what can happen? I'm like, nothing can happen, But if you're designing, and so that's relative public policy, because that's public policy relative to the existing regime. But if you're designing absolute public policy, which is what absolutely a sovereign power should do with a country like America in the state that it's currently in, you're in a completely different intellectual space. And, even if that space is just intellectual masturbation and this empire is forever, unlike all other empires in the past, and, nothing is possible, it's still this amazing space for like intellectual masturbation. It's like the best porn you've ever seen because you can do anything, right? And so from an intellectual perspective, even the abstraction of what should power do if power could do anything in the current state of the continent of America is a wildly interesting question. And, there's so much work that can be done in that space. There's so much, cool premium content that can be generated. There are so many Substack subscriptions that are just up there for the taking. And I feel like I'm basically the only gold miner on this incredible vein of gold. And, am I making bank? Well, not bank, but yeah, people seem to like it. And I'm just like, as a grifter, I should keep it to myself. But really, my message is, come on, everybody, there's a lot of gold here. And you should be digging it up with both hands. You should be imagining what the next world should look like, because that's what you should be thinking as you see this one kind of palpably coming to an end. Right?
Yeah.
Yes, so that's my perspective. That might be a little galaxy brain for the likes of Chris Rufo. I'd love to, if he listens to this, I'd love to debate him sometime. I mean, I'm obviously a friendly critic, and maybe I can convince him of the virtues of critical race theory. I mean, new critical race theory, of course.
Yeah, I was thinking earlier we were talking about those pirates that that Pompey fought and kidnapped Caesar. To wrap it back up, they were Albanians. These problems never go away,
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of them were Illyrians, which is basically the same thing as an Albanian. I hope Martin Shkreli isn't listening to this. I feel like there may be some.
Is he still doing a bid?
There may have been. I mean, he's clearly he's unbalanced in an Albanian way, but the intelligence is, I suspect that it's whenever you see someone like that, you have to suspect that there's, to be frank, a Jew in the woodpile, and I suspect that we're really looking at
early life.
I suspect that we're Wikipedia early life, and I wouldn't be surprised to find that we're actually looking at a Shreljuski here, So I mean, I'm not saying, but I'm saying, that's just speculation. It's not. I wasn't looking at the early life, but that's the Albanian question. Maybe we should do another podcast that's kind of purely on the Albanian question, because I think it would be,
I don't know. They got shooters. I heard that's a racist.
All right, fine. I love Albanians. I mean, or shkberries, have gigs and tasks or something. All great people. Really, what we need is more Albanian immigration. Especially to like Malibu or whatever. I think that would really diversify Malibu. Are Albanians the? I should stop before I get myself in trouble.
Jessica Alba's Albanian, right?
Okay. So, God bless, the great Iskandar or whatever, Skanderbeg. God bless Skanderbeg, and the whole Albanian peoples, and Kosovo, of course, is Albanian and will always be Albanian. Fuck those dogs of Serbs and their dog mothers. I didn't say that either. The Serbs are no, they can be quite truculent as well. So, I guess what I want to say is I have no dog in that fight, and I don't think anyone is actually descended from dogs. Except possibly
the Welsh.
The Welsh, right? And,
I'm
sure my Welsh brother-in-law will. Sorry, go on.
You ever seen this pathetic conservative propaganda, this TPUSA stuff?
The turning. I've seen. Yeah, I'm familiar, vaguely familiar with Turning Point USA.
There's some great memes where they use this motif and the same things, and they restyle it as if it was like an Albanian nationalist movement. It's like,
that's nice.
It's like, sorry, libtard, but Illyria belongs to the Albanians and shit like this.
The Scriberies, right? Yeah, absolutely. Well, the thing is, and I think how long we've been doing this? 2 hours and 45 minutes, something like that. So it's I'm probably abusing. Probably all of your listeners have long since stopped listening and are just like jacking off and playing video games. But
you kidding me? Not for Curtis Yarvin.
And at a certain point there will be. I can't really go on like this forever.
Really, once you go over 2 hours, it's
it becomes
kind
brutal.
Of experience.
A different kind of experience. And besides, I'm almost out of cognac here. But in any case, again, I endorse the Lerat VSOP. That's what you should be drinking. You don't need to go for the XO. The VSOP is sufficient. It'll run you about $40 a bottle at Total Wine. Absolutely worth it. In any case, Graymere brought to you by Cognac Lerat. No actual affiliation. I'm just a fan. In any case, one of the things that sort of makes all of this possible in a way, which is, I think, for your background in media criticism, which you guys are like super educated Southerners, and with the kind of, with that kind of background, one thing that's sort of interesting to observe is the increasing sophistication of the audience over the 20th century. And when I say the audience, I mean both the entertainment audience and the political audience, because they're the same audience. And, there's always been irony and sophistication in history, but for most of history, those have been reserved to a very, very small elite, even if they've existed at all. And the mental space and the mental world that most people have existed in has been much more simplistic. You can see this if you look at war propaganda in some ways, because if you look at like World War I propaganda, it's very straightforward. It's like, how do I convince Americans to fight Germany? I say, the Hun is coming to rape your sister with his spiked helmet, right? And you have this poster of the Hun, this barbaric gorilla-like thing, and he's like thrusting with his pickelhaube, and here's this woman I can't even mention it, right? And so you look at this propaganda, and of course it's not film propaganda, it's just posters, but you're like, yep, okay, this is the war that destroyed Western civilization, and it appears to have been fought by grown men, with the mindset of 11-year-olds. Because, of course, the propaganda on every side is just as unsophisticated, mostly. Then you go to World War II, and you're like Hitler Lives or whatever, and you're like, wow, okay, it's definitely more sophisticated. This war appears to have been fought by 13-year-olds. And of course, you don't have the all-inspiring war propaganda so much later, but you can follow that through the entertainment audience. And so movies, for example, are getting more and more sophisticated, but you still don't see this modern sense of seriously drugged out irony until the 60s. And, the way I like to put the increase in the sort of mass capacity for conceiving ironies is, suppose you take a film like Inception, which is like a blockbuster in 2010 or whatever, and you take it back and you show it to the audience in 1960. They're expecting a Cary Grant film or whatever the fuck. You show them Inception, and they're just like, they're like, somebody put something in my popcorn. I am never coming to this theater again. And like, you know, this film appears to be made by Satan. Like, they can't even process the sequence of images that they see, right? You know, they don't hardly even integrate the frames. You know, even in, like, you know, you showed Inception in like 1985, it would be like a weird cult film. It would be like Repo Man or something. You showed it in 2010, it makes like $300 million. And you ask people what's going on in Inception, they're like, oh yeah, there's 3 levels of layers of reality, and you fall backward into the bathtub and you pop up one. And, you know, the people are just so completely used to these techniques of irony and meta, and they've been so widely, you know, distributed across the population, right? And so that affects the raw material of political engineering. And when you basically try to, you know, get energy out of people based on the principle of you should be really butthurt because you're being raped in the ass and you're not even complaining about it and you even kind of like it. And instead, let's start by, you know, applying some hemorrhoid cream or something like that, you know, but it's all, you know, it's all based on this sort of, you know, like, actually, if people responded to being butthurt in any normal historical fashion, they would already have established the, like, 17th Reich, you know, based on what's being taught to their kids in school, right? And
did you guys see that viral video that just yesterday, where they're at a spa in California or whatever, and this lady comes to the front desk and says, "Hey, there's a man in the ladies."
Oh my God! No, I didn't see this.
Spa. He's got his penis out, and they're like, there are little girls in here. And this person's like, there's nothing I can do about it. This is the law now. And this you know, like, progressive guy comes up to her, and he's like, excuse me, you shouldn't be saying that. You're bigoted. And she just turns around, and she's maybe version 2.5, not quite version 3 of American. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
She goes, well, if you were a real man, you'd do something about this. And it just rolls off that guy's back like water on a duck.
He doesn't.
Like, it doesn't hurt him.
This is,
he
by
knows
the way,
he's superior to that.
By the way, this is
an
important lesson that conservatives would have learned if they had read your stuff before, is that they were not, in fact, one more Supreme Court justice away from the right.
Strangely, the football. Lucy has again moved the football, right? You know, so you know, like, let me finish this analogy though. You know, the point is that you have. You know, if you look at the modern, you know, populace, these are some of the most weakest, most pusillanimous, most apathetic, most disconnected voters that have ever existed. And so when you ask them to behave like, you know, the Sons of Liberty in the 1770s or something, you're just not going to get that. And the ones who do behave like that will basically wind up doing January 6th, right? It's just a total unmitigated shit show. And, you know, political engineering, like all engineering, sort of depends on the fuel you have for it. And what we have is this population that is, like, uniquely capable of outstanding leaps of irony and basically of just, like, not taking reality seriously. And so, you know, when you say, okay, my way of convincing people to do shit politically is I'm going to convince them sincerely that their anus is in pain. They need, you know, maybe a smaller guy to work on them. They need, you know, some cream should be put on the area, you know, between rounds. You know, that basically butthurt-oriented politics. You're relying on a capacity that they used to have, but they no longer have. Instead, I think the politics of the 20th century will rely on a capacity that they used to not have, but they now have, which is the capacity for these immense leaps of irony. And with these immense leaps of irony, if you ask people to say, hey, wow, why don't we just shut down the government and replace it with another one? Like, an ironic person would be like, sure, why not? What else have we tried? You know, let's try that and see what happens, right? You know, and so they're much more... It's actually much easier to move them a long distance than to move them a short distance, because you move them a long distance with the aid of this power of irony, which, you know, is just a new power that you didn't think you had. Whereas if you try to move them with the power of butthurt, it just gets, you know, progressively weaker and weaker and weaker. And that's
you
why,
could make it into romanticism, right? I mean, you could
Yeah.
it could do what romanticism did.
It
to
could
the
do
late
what
19th
romanticism
century.
did, where basically people are like, they're in this kind of grim, you suddenly sort of introduce this sense of magic and possibility into the world of politics, which has been this kind of grim affair. It's like, romantic nationalism sort of goes together. You're not, when you try to do romantic nationalism all over again, you fail. But, the point is to actually learn from the meta thing in a way. And what you have to do is give people a sense that you're offering them something wildly improbable but enormous. And that wildly improbable thing will become possible.
My friend tweeted out today, post 20, it said, modern people, if November Rain had come out like yesterday, people would just say, what is this cheesy word salad? Like what, because it's all these like overt themes of love and romance and stuff. And people would just be like,
right.
What the hell is this?
Right.
Okay.
All right. I think we should we wrap it up after that?
Absolutely.
Was that at least an 8 out of 10? Did we have a good podcast?
Yeah. Not this
Excellent.
10 out of 10.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you, sir. Gray with an A. Mirror.
Gray with an A as in America. .substack.com. And I'll be hopefully I'll be seeing that spike in subscriptions soon. Thank you so much, guys, and let's talk again sometime soon.
If you like what you just heard and you want more, you can find all of our content on patreon.com/GOODOLBOYZ.
And you can catch us streaming live on kick.com at Good Old Boys, same words.